Okay, thank you everyone for attending the, is it on? Okay. Oh, you can? That's weird. Me too. Okay, so thank you all for attending the Law and Licensing Committee. I'll go ahead and just begin by having, I am not, okay.
Yeah, so it's not coming through the mic.
You hear me because I'm loud.
Well, it records, so we need to have.
Right, okay. Is it work? Yep. There we go. Okay. So welcome again to the Law and Licensing Committee. I just would like for everybody to introduce themselves. That way we know who is here, although many of you look extremely familiar. So we'll begin, I guess, Lorraine and Travis. You guys don't need.
Travis Rawlings, Educator Licensing Coordinator for the board.
Okay.
Tracy Watson, Education Association.
We'll start there and then.
Barbie Faust, Al Strader, the School District. Gary Christian, in charge of Nick Hansen, Jordan District. Jim Ambassador, HR, Jordan District. James Kaczynski, Western Government University.
Great. Thank you for coming. And we don't have anybody signed up for public comment, but if throughout the discussion you feel like you would like to give input, feel free to just raise your hand and we'll try to accommodate you. Okay, our first item on the agenda is a change to our board bylaws. Pull that up. And which proposal? Let's start with your proposal since, yeah, so that you can head back. So Board Member Lear will do her first proposal.
And it's pretty simple. Ben Rasmussen's projecting it up on the screen. I don't have it in front of me. I just thought it was important. I think it is important as we vote in our meetings. I think we should. I think every member present should vote. I know that Robert's Rules of Order doesn't require that. It is the legislative practice for all legislative members who are in the room at the time of a vote to vote. And in fact, they go chase them down if they're not there to vote. So I think it's really important for our constituents and our the policymakers to pay attention to what the board does, to know what how the different board members feel and vote on different items. So I think it's a matter of respect for that position and respect for our constituents that we should be willing to express our opinion on a matter. If a person doesn't want to, then just doesn't want to for any reason, he can leave the room and not be there for the vote. So there's an option for a person to abstain if he wants to. Secondly, I think there are times when there's a conflict of interest, and I know I've had that come up myself and had to or felt that it was important and the right thing to do to not vote or participate in a discussion, and so I've recused myself or I've abstained from voting depending on the circumstances. So I think that there is a reason for not voting, not participating in a discussion, but I think for the most part that the board members ought to vote their positions on every vote that the board takes. That's as simple as that, and that's what the language reflects.
Okay, yes.
In the proposed language, it states that a board member has a distinct and articulable conflict of interest. Can you explain the language and why we're using articulable? So would it be required that you explain exactly why you're not voting, or what does that mean?
And those are the best words that we could find. Ben contributed to the writing of this. My idea is that if you have and I can use all kinds of different words, legitimate conflict of interest, if you have a business conflict of interest, if you know a person that is intimately involved in the issue to the point you can't be, and that's not even objectivity, to the point that you feel like you can't make a good board decision. So I can't. It's a one of those things that it's easier to know when it's happening to you than to describe. But go ahead. But I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
But it's something I don't think the person has to articulate it. But I would leave it to their integrity to have a conflict of interest, to only not vote when they didn't have a conflict of interest.
Our AAG would like to make a comment.
And with regard to the conflict of interest, let me read from your bylaws. It says, confidential committee work or any matters to be voted upon by the board which involves a conflict of interest shall be disclosed by a member in the committee or in open meeting to the members of the committee or the board prior to consideration of the matter. The committee or board chair shall excuse a member from a conflict of interest unless such interest can be waived. So it's not just a vote. You'd have to be, the conflict would have to be disclosed as the matter is raised, and then that person would be excused from consideration of the matter, not just the vote. So it would be the discussion, it would be any of the part.
Well,
that's what the bylaws say right now.
But not to contradict too much, but it says may be excused. So it's not necessarily the person wouldn't have to be excused.
And it is subject to waiver, absolutely. But to make your language consistent, it would have to be. To make your matter consistent, it would have to be prior to the matter being considered, not just the vote, and then the conflict has to be disclosed, and then it's subject to waiver. You're absolutely right. But as far as kind of the steps that need to be taken into consideration, I just need to move your suggested language back a couple of steps, because it'd have to be long before the vote would come. It would have to be as the matter is discussed.
Okay, yes, Brittany.
So what if we were to stop at all board members present at a meeting shall vote when a vote is being taken by the board, and then period, except in circumstances as noted in the previous part of the bylaws referencing the conflict of interest situation.
And I guess I would feel okay about that. I think it's important to note, and we've not always done this consistently, as I've observed the board for decades and as I've participated in the board for a couple of years, there have been lots of variations on that theme. And I think it's important to note that there's discretion in that current bylaw about participating in a conversation versus excused, and then a determination, I guess, by the chair if the person should participate or not. But I would be fine with what.
So is that a motion?
Yes, I would like to move that we strike the second sentence and just insert a reference to exceptions.
So if I word it this way, except in accordance with these bylaws?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, so the motion before us is to strike the second sentence and to add what did you say, Ben?
Except in accordance with these
Except in
bylaws.
accordance with these bylaws.
Or you could even go to the number of the bylaw that A.G. Thomas was citing.
Okay, so we have a motion before us. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, I just have one thing to say, of course.
To the
It is.
To the amendment or to
the
the
amendment?
full motion?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it's not.
Because I have one.
Okay. Okay, so seeing no comment, we'll vote on the amendment to the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So now we're back to the, oh yeah, we have no motion. So yes.
I move that we approve the addition of item 7 under H in the bylaws, stating all board members present at a meeting shall vote when a vote is being taken by the board, except in accordance with these bylaws, as well as adding the word shall to lines item 6.
Okay. So the motion before us is to approve all board members present at a meeting shall vote when a voting is being taken by the board, except as noted in the bylaws, and then adding shall.
Up at line six.
Adding shall to number.
That's telling that the chair shall
Number.
vote.
Sorry, substituting.
I didn't talk about that part. That's important too.
I have an issue with that one. I think Mark would.
I just have a question.
Yes. Age. And then-
No, I'm sorry, I'm a little dense, but I'm wondering if we're starting to get kind of a chicken and egg problem, or kind of getting circular, because in 8 it talks about except as modified by state law or rule. Robert's Rules controls. So you have to take a look. You start with that, and then if it's modified by a rule, and so now our rule says that our bylaws say that if you have a conflict of interest, you have to disclose that, and then you have to proceed with that. And then you have an exception to that, which is that you now have this one. So you've got an exception to an exception. Ben, is that from a drafting staff? I just want to make sure that it's internally consistent, so we don't have an exception from an exception from an exception.
Well, I think we've stated what the primary rule is going to be before we get to the Robert's Rules part, so I think it's clear that takes precedence,
Okay.
in my view.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the language doesn't become internally inconsistent. Thanks.
Any discussion to the motion? Oh, wait.
Carol,
Board member. Anna, yes.
And maybe Carol can answer this. Why was the chair? Why was the chair not voting?
I don't know.
Has that been around for a long time? Because it's been the whole time I've been on the board. Oh, Lorraine.
Does Robert's Rules say the chair doesn't have to vote?
Yeah.
Well, I think Robert's Rules does say that, but statute says that every board member must vote. So generally what practice is, if the chair doesn't vote, whatever the prevailing side is, his vote goes to the prevailing side.
Okay.
That's how it's recorded. So he always has a vote recorded, whoever the chair is.
And I guess my druthers would be that it happens as it says, that the board chair shall vote. I know that a couple of past board chairs have not voted for the most part.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Board member Belknap.
Just for clarity, but board leaders or the chairs do vote, even if they don't say it out loud. They are on the prevailing side unless they're breaking
Unless
a
they-
tie.
Right.
So
Or
their
unless
vote
they
is
state.
counted.
Right.
And I don't know if we need to then, if my proposal, what I was anticipating, or what I intended to say was they shall vote audibly. I don't know if we need to add that, because that was my intent. I thought that was saying that by saying the board chair shall vote. I absolutely defer to Lorraine's knowledge of Robert's Rules, and if the vote goes that way, but I think that the constituents certainly would not know that.
Okay. AAG Thomas.
I think that's recorded in the minutes. So if you want to do it, whether it's done audibly or not, the minutes would reflect and the minutes are approved. So as far as an official, from a constituent standpoint, they would know because it would be recorded in the minutes. Isn't that correct, Lorraine? Yeah. So the minutes do reflect what actually happened in the matter.
Okay. Board member Belknap.
Thanks. So, Lorraine, may I ask her to come
Yes.
to the table, Chair? Because I have some questions for you, okay? And I should have asked you before. I just wanted you on the hot seat. So if we change this to shall vote, are we doing something different than Robert Rules asks us to do? It seems like we are.
Yes, Robert Rules
And-
allows for abstentions
In it for the board chair as well as board members.
for any board member, yeah.
Okay, and do you have any insight as to why it has abstentions for people?
I don't.
I've
Okay.
been studying Robert's Rules
Okay,
a bit.
yes.
And
Raise your hand for me, your turn.
sorry.
You're the boss.
And the reason why, as stated according to Robert's Rule, is that if a board member felt that they did not have enough information, that they could not, they didn't feel comfortable taking a position on either side, and so for that reason, I would still like to protect the ability to abstain for that reason. Yes.
Okay. However, we do not follow strict Robert's rules because of some things required under statute. And so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we count. So when under Robert's rules, it's a majority of voting members. So if you abstain, then the number of voting decreases, and then you can still pass a vote, right? So if you have 15 members, if I understand Robert's rules, not our rules that we're under, so we do not follow Robert's rules as far as our voting. We have to have 8 votes, a quorum of our full board, in order to pass something. Robert's rules, if we only have 10 people sitting around the table and 5 people vote or 6 people vote yes, then it passes. And so we do not follow strict Robert's rules. And so if we abstain, it is a no vote, period. Right? Because we are not following correct Robert's rules by statute. And so,
unless, according to Robert's rules, you can ask that the vote be recorded as an abstention.
okay, it's recorded.
Right.
It's recorded as an abstention, but because we don't follow Robert's rules under statute, we have to have 8 positive votes. And so in essence, or in effect, an abstention is a no vote. And so, because we don't follow Robert's rules,
Why the change then?
because so statute requires that we have to have a 8. I don't know the wording in statute.
It's a quorum of the
quorum
total
of
board
the
members.
total board members has to vote, and so that doesn't follow Robert's rules, right?
Right.
And so when we abstain because of lack of information or whatever else, we are voting no, period, whether we understand that or not or whatever. And so if we sit there and we don't come prepared for a meeting, we are basically barring the ability for the board to move forward with action or to not take action on something in a positive way. And so there is some value in what this proposed change, because it requires board members to come prepared and to vote yes or no on a topic, because we do not follow Robert's rules in our voting and in our numbers as far as how we count a vote, because of statutes, not because we did it. And so this particular change would actually be a more transparent opportunity for us to really understand how our vote is affecting and what we're doing. And so I think there is some value in it, because because we abstain doesn't mean that it changes the vote.
And I agree with that. However, I don't recall statute requiring us to take positions on legislation. Am I correct? And that has been the only times when I have abstained, because I haven't felt comfortable taking a position at that point on a legislation when it can change later on, or I don't know enough about the legislation.
Correct. And so
So would this require us to vote during legislation, or do we need to put something in there? Yes.
So
board member.
It would require you to vote. So if the motion on the table is, I would like to support HB 17532, right? And so then you would say, I do not feel comfortable supporting this piece of legislation because blah, blah, blah. And so I will be voting no. Right? And so it's different than an abstention, because an abstention is the same thing. It's basically saying I don't have enough information, but it is in effect a no vote. And so it creates the opportunity for board members to articulate exactly the decision making in that and why they feel that, instead of just abstaining, which is the same thing as a no.
Right. I suppose the only issue I have with that when it comes to voting for legislation is that then the legislator sees that no vote and thinks that as a lack of support, so perhaps walking out of the room would be the best option.
It could be.
Okay.
And to simplify a little bit what Brittany was saying, the board has said in its bylaws that it follows Robert's Rules of Order, except when it chooses not to. So, and if I recall, that it says that. So there's nothing illegal or contrary about having a different provision in the bylaws. That there's no sacredness about Robert's Rules of Order. And I think if we looked carefully, there are probably other ways that our bylaws differ slightly from Robert's Rules of Order. So I just wanted to point that out and say that this is nothing that world changing that it couldn't have this provision, which yes, and yes, Michelle, my thinking was every vote of the board, not distinguishing between votes about legislation or votes about the new generation science standards or votes about the health curriculum, that all votes of the board would be handled the same
And
way.
I suppose my issue is legislation doesn't require us to vote on positions
They're
on a
votes of
bill.
the board. That's what it says.
So
in
I
the
would
law.
like to make an amendment to the motion.
Well, wait.
Oh,
Can
yes.
I ask a question? Because Lorraine, you mentioned something about legislature. There's legislation that we're to vote.
No, when we take
I
votes.
believe it's in statute, and I couldn't tell you where that. You have to record the votes of every member.
Okay.
You want to
We
look
don't
that
have
up,
to vote,
Angie?
but
If I had my computer in front of me, it does say that they have to record the vote.
Yeah, there's a vote that has to be recorded.
Okay.
So my only amendment would be that this would be except while taking position on
Pending.
legislation during the legislative session.
Just clarification, would you also want it to include action on fiscal items or only on bills? Do you see, because we could maybe draft it as broadly as when the board is taking a position of approved or something against a legislative proposal, something that they're proposing.
Yes.
I don't know if that makes sense. It looks like.
I know. Yes.
No, I just wanted to add that the statute that Lorraine was looking to, it's in the Open Meetings Act. It says that in the Open Meetings Act, it says that the minutes shall reflect all of the votes that are taken. That's why when we were talking about electing officers, when we had this kind of the ballots where weren't disclosed, as long as it was disclosed who you voted for and they were placed in the minutes, that was the critical piece of that. So I think that's the statute.
It's also in the. I think it's also in the statute, the specific board statute. But
Hold on. Did you have a comment, Board Member Belknap? Oh, yes.
you know what? If it's not all votes, I would rather withdraw my motion for a bylaw because I think I don't want to split hairs, pick at nits. I just think that all board votes should be available for our constituents to know. My preference would be an audible vote at the time, not finding them in the minutes later. So if, depending on, maybe you want this to go away, in that case, if Michelle's amendment passes, I would just withdraw the request for the bylaw change because I don't want it to be splitting hairs. I just want the board's vote to always be available for the public. I think that's the most fair, open, and transparent and responsible thing to do as board members.
I 100% agree with you in accordance with statute. And once again, statute does not require us to take position on pending legislation.
And once again, our rules have lots of
Excuse
things in it.
me. Thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Just a moment. Did you fix that?
I haven't fixed it yet, but I guess the thing that I guess you could take a position that when you're taking a position on legislation, it's not an action, it's not binding, versus like when you're taking action as a board on your agenda items, those are actions that are binding. It's something in your power and control that you are, effectively engaging in lawmaking, rulemaking, or others. And so I guess I think that I'm trying to help you facilitate if you wanted a compromise just on those legislative items or taking positions on what the legislature's doing. I guess that would be different than an action that's under your power as a
Right.
board. So you might be able to differentiate that way. And I'm trying, and I'll work on something.
Yes.
I couldn't find
that's
anything.
what I would appreciate
Does-
doing.
And the open meetings law is enough. If it is only there, that's enough satisfaction for me.
Yes.
Well, I guess, like I said,
The mic's
I
not.
would prefer that, given that it's something I brought to this committee, I would ask you that you would either vote and I thank you, Angie, for that sort of explanation and attempt to reach a compromise. For me, it's not a matter that's something I want to compromise on. I think the board should either vote on positions generally. and across the board, rather than try to distinguish certain kinds of positions from other kinds of votes. And so, again, depending on the vote on Michelle's motion, if it was a motion, I would
It was.
decide to withdraw the. I would just withdraw the bylaws and then petition the chair to have it on
So,
the board discussion rather than in the committee.
We already have a motion on the table, so we can't withdraw anything. And then, depending on how this passes here, whether it passes affirmatively or in the negative, it will still go before the board to be discussed.
Okay, that would work too.
And then at that point, you can bring up again your request. And so I'm just waiting for, yeah, it's an amendment to the motion.
Michelle, I
Yes,
think
Board
this
Member
is
Belknap.
germane to this.
Okay.
If it's not, you can stop me, please. A comment that was made, and Brittany, you're just going to have to accept this with love because it was a little offensive to me. No, it's okay. I'm just being, I'm that not prepared. I don't believe that's what Michelle was saying when she couldn't take a vote, that she didn't understand all the concepts, because sometimes new things are introduced at the table there, and we just can't make a vote because it's too big, but the body isn't willing to table it at the time. And so for me as a voting member, I am conflicted now. Maybe I've done all my research and I'm well prepared, but something new comes. I want the ability to abstain because I can't pick or choose either side. And so it's not about preparation for me. It's about new information that might come. But I also appreciate the fact that some do come unprepared and still can't make a decision. So
Yeah.
So I've got some language that I drafted up there that you can see. Well, maybe you can't see it, and this is
Just go Control Plus on it several times.
and then Dave, if you have ideas.
Number one.
I know, this is stunning. I only learn things I have to learn.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. So let's just take this out.
You can't declare a conflict at the time of the vote.
Make sure
Right. We have to take out number 1. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Board Member Warner.
I appreciate all the discussion here. The thing is I go back to that meeting that we had where there were 10 or 11 of us, and we couldn't support or oppose anything, and I think it made us look really dysfunctional, for lack of a better word. And so I support this motion and having us vote, and maybe we need to have a discussion about how we support or oppose legislation. I know that a year or two, I think it was Dave Crandall that implemented that idea where we could say, we'll support it on such and such a day with this revision, but I just felt like the public was frustrated with us. We were frustrated. Our stakeholders were frustrated. The legislature was frustrated because we couldn't oppose or support anything. And so I support Carol's motion, and I worry, I just wonder if we should have a discussion about when we support or oppose legislation. But I just thought it didn't make us look good. So.
And my worry was that I felt like I was being asked to support legislation so early on when we know that amendments come. And then I remember a few years back, my first year on the board, when we did this, and then amendments changed the intent of what we had originally supported. So then we're changing our mind. And that also does not come across well. And so I would rather wait until we see the amendments, understand what this law is, we can still direct staff to work with legislators. And then when we're confident that we know that, okay, this isn't going to change too much, take a position. I feel that shows a better understanding on our part, and I think that the legislators would appreciate it rather than us waffling back and forth. So that's why I put that in there. And we absolutely should have the discussion on legislation and taking positions and how that should look. I agree with that 100%. Yes, Board Member Cummins. Lisa.
You actually had to look at the sign.
My brain.
Just thinking out loud here. What if the board took positions on legislation that has passed after the session and has sent out a review? I mean, it lets the public know where we feel about this, even though it has passed or I don't know, maybe that's, too late to do such a thing, but it might solve the problem of, because sometimes bills, at the last second, last Friday, 11:38 at night, and things can change or get dropped. And so, what does the board do at that point? Are we going to convene at 11:39 and say, stop? So if we said, this bill will be good for this, or this bill will have problems with this, and so that the legislators know, maybe so they know how to prepare for the next session. I don't know, but I'm just thinking out loud here.
So definitely things to talk about.
So one thing we had discussed, Dave and I, is whether you want to just have two general definitions of types of votes that you take, because one would be like a legal action you're required to take under federal or state law, versus something that's more of like an advisory type of a vote, because the legislative, a vote, even to recommend a veto actually isn't necessarily something you're legally required as a board to do. It's something that's kind of optional. We're just trying to brainstorm, and we could also brainstorm a little more some of these ideas and bring some more language back next meeting, but kind of defining the difference between an action you're required to take under state law or advisory, which could get a little tricky because there could be some things anyway.
Yes.
The only time the board votes is when a motion comes before the board from a board member, right? And so and the purpose of a motion is basically to change the motion of the board, to change something, to change direction, to do something. It creates action of the board or those that work for the board. And so it really isn't that complicated when we talk about, we often talk about we're sending messages or whatever. We're really not. We're either saying we agree with that movement or we don't agree with that movement. And that's what we need to recognize, that when a motion becomes a board, no matter what it is, that we need to decide, do I agree with that movement in that direction, or do I not agree with that movement in that direction? And that's all it is. And so no matter what the vote is, whether it's a board member decides, and we don't have to take positions on legislation, and it's a completely separate topic. We don't have to do any of those things. And so that comes from a board member making a decision to create a motion, to create direction in that way. And so if no board members make those motions, we don't have to decide whether or not we agree with that or not. And so it's if we simplify it just as board members understanding that a yes vote is yes, I agree, let's go in that direction, or no, I don't agree with going in that direction. It's not a matter of opposing or philosophical or anything like that. It's just a direction, a motion, and that's why we call it a motion. And so anyways, and that's why I think that we're maybe a little bit overcomplicating it when we are trying to decide what types of motions or whatever, but just the decision of yes or no.
Yes.
And that was my point. And Brittany said it far better. At that point in time, the board decides to support a bill. Everyone can identify the point in time that the board voted to support a bill or did not vote to support a bill. And I wasn't intending to overcomplicate it. I was also looking to, I actually had this thought in my mind at the point that Terrell identified that the board was looking useless. And if we can't take a position and speak to a moment in time and say yes or no, then I don't think we're doing the duty that we were elected to do. And I think we look to other policymakers as indecisive and unimportant. And I think it's the board's duty, which is, again, why I felt like this was an important change or clarification, that the board should speak in this moment in time, understanding that legislation changes, understanding that it changes multiple times. And we were clear, I thought, last session in a couple of votes that we support the bill, a bill, in the moment as it's written currently. So that was my intention. I wasn't intending to overcomplicate this or make it several votes of the board, and some you can abstain from and others you can't. And that's why my druthers is to just say a vote of the board, a board of the vote is that moment in time.
Okay, we'll go to Board Member Warner, and then which one of you, Lisa?
And the reason I support this is because we have stakeholder groups, we have parent groups that are making decisions to support or oppose bills, and if they do it, I mean, if they could, I just think that if they're doing it and they can do it on a certain day at a certain time, this is the bill we're supporting, I think, or opposing, I think that we can do that as well, because we have general control over education. We should probably be a little bit more involved so it doesn't look so, as Carol said, like we're useless. Thanks.
Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
I see certain other board members leaving the Capitol boardroom pretty much on every vote then and getting up and leaving the room so that there's no yes or no vote from them. If I may, do we have a motion on the floor?
We do. With an amendment, yes.
Okay, I would like to have an amendment to the amendment, and maybe postpone for a month to next meeting to talk about exclusively just for votes during legislative session, and keep that separate from the motion that Carol is proposing, so that, because I think there's two different scenarios going on here, and so I'd like to keep that separate and make it more specific to legislative versus regular board meetings.
Yes. Board Member Cummins.
And I would just, I know the amendment right now is to differentiate votes, like whether they're legislative or other board action. But I just want to be clear that the proposed change for the bylaws, the original proposed change, doesn't require us to take action on legislative or to take positions on legislative. There's nothing in these bylaws that puts any requirement on us to sit there in the Capitol boardroom to take action, to create that motion in the first place. And so that is a decision that we as board members would have to make as to when is it appropriate, because there are times when that is a very appropriate and important conversation to have, and there are times when it's not, and we have to make those decisions as board members independent of, is it important that when we're around a boardroom table that we vote, that we make those decisions, because we don't follow the Roberts Rules of Order, because we are part of that quorum whether we abstain or not, and so whether we're present or not, which is frustrating. Like, you get sick and you're a no vote, right? And so is it important that we create a situation where people are prepared, and I don't mean just prepared like done the homework, right? And but prepared to either decide to take action or to not take action on that. A no vote, if somebody makes a vote to support HB blah blah blah, and a no vote does not mean you oppose the bill, right? It means I don't want to take that action right now. I don't want to support it. So anyways, and so I think we're pulling these too close together when we're talking so much about the legislative votes.
Chair, may I follow up on that?
Yes.
And that's why I want to keep it separate. Because I think during the legislative session, there's so much fluidity going on. I want it to keep it separate. And I want to support Terrell, and I want to support Carol on this, but I also want to support, those that don't want to be able to have an absolute yes or no vote during the legislative session. It has to be two separate rules, and I think that's a bigger conversation to have.
Board Member Belknap, did you still have a comment?
I think it's interesting that we're assuming that there's only two choices for a decision here. And I appreciated one of Brittany's pieces that you can say no, and this is the reason I say no, but that never goes past that moment in time. And that's where my frustration lies with that. And that two choices sometimes aren't the only choice. The other thing, when we are on the Hill and we are talking about legislation and somebody feels really strongly about it, they throw a motion on the table. And now we are forced at that very moment in time to choose one or the other. And we might not be ready to do that yet. And yet you're still forced to say no. And it comes out, no, I do not like this concept. That's what it comes out to look like. Or yes, I do like this concept. Even if you state, I don't like it because of A, B, and C. Or I'm going to vote yes because of A, B, and C. That never translates out of there. So I have rubbed with it.
Yes, Board Member Warner.
Well, first of all, I'd like to let everybody know that we're celebrating Michelle and Lisa's birthdays today. So other than that, Angie, I have a question. So when, to celebrate their birthdays, we're going to take a motion. Yeah. No. They're 29. They're 29, both of them.
Stick with that.
So Angie, I have a question. When a legislator is proposing legislation, at what point do various groups approve it or support it or oppose it?
Well,
Yes.
I mean, usually it's after the bill is numbered. That's usually when it happens. So that's kind of why I stated in this language a numbered bill or a fiscal proposal of a legislative committee to differentiate, for example, what you all have done, we've all done in November, December, and January. At times, we as staff bring forward certain ideas for statutory changes or budget requests that would be the board's. And so I wanted to, I appreciate your question, because the way I've drafted it actually would mean that you would have to vote on, for example, if I came to you and said, I have this great idea, I think the board should support these large statutory changes, that actually wouldn't be covered under here, and you as a board would essentially be required to vote. Or like when Scott and the rest of the staff bring forward legislative fiscal proposals for recommendations to you, that wouldn't fall here. I'm actually trying to limit it to a legislatively already numbered bill or a proposal of a legislator or legislative committee for fiscal action. That's when you wouldn't, is that?
Yeah, she wants all. She was clear on all or nothing.
Can I make one other comment?
Yes.
The other thing I had thought about was just stating when you have your legislative meetings, but I worried about that because there are times when you take action on other things during those Thursday meetings that aren't purely legislative. So that's why I didn't do it that way.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion on the board that she just read. I'll read it again. I'll restate the motion. All board members present at a meeting shall vote when a vote is being taken by the board. A board member may be excused from voting if the purpose of the vote is to take a position on a legislative numbered bill or fiscal proposal of a legislator or legislative committee. Any further discussion to the motion, the amendment?
Yes.
Oh.
The amendment.
On the floor right now.
Oh.
Okay, they may abstain. Okay, let's change that.
I guess Lisa had an amendment to my amendment, so we need to vote on that first.
Do you mind if? Do you mind if? Okay. We changed it to abstain. May abstain from voting.
Can I say something about this?
Yes.
I actually appreciate the idea. I think Terrell brought it up first, that the discussion isn't so much about taking votes, but it's about what should we be doing as a board during legislative votes? What should we be doing? And I don't know, because so many times we've talked about handcuffing our members and not allowing them to move forward, but are we handcuffing other members by doing what we're doing? So maybe that needs to be the topic, and maybe that needs to be something in our board bylaws, what we do with legislative bills and fiscal notes along those lines.
That would, okay, so the amendment to the amendment is to table this for further discussion about
Yes.
the purpose of a legislative meeting, or what? Table the motion. Okay. Oh, but we're only labeling, so we need to postpone rather than table, because if we table it, we have to pick it up later on today.
Postpone. Thank you for the wording.
Thank you, Lorraine. Okay. Yes.
So Angie, do you think, I mean, when you think about this, and Lorraine, I'd love your input too, is there a way to do something different when we are on the Hill? Are we just postponing this to find out there's maybe nothing that can happen? Or are we, and then separate these two items? I'll take either one of your thoughts.
I mean,
Chair's okay.
Oh,
I was just going to say, I mean, anything's possible. There's been different things that this board has done in the past with respect to those Thursday meetings and taking action on every single bill. Other proposals have been, let's not ever take action on a bill, but only make recommendations for amendments, etc. I mean, it really, if you all have ideas, we're open to trying to brainstorm some, either a process or some language.
No, and there are a number of different ways that you can take motions. For example, the board could move to pass a resolution that Ben is a really fabulous guy. And you say, well, but is that your power? No, but all you're doing is you're just speaking in kind of an advisory or kind of in kind of a statement of what the board's position is, even though it doesn't have any kind of legal effect. And I think that's what Angie was trying to drive at, is that there are certain things that you're following the Administrative Procedures Act, and it has a binding effect not only on the board, but also on, those that you have administration over. And then there are certain areas that are, I'm not saying that they're completely frivolous, but you can move from the completely frivolous down to things that are not as important. And legislation is just, it's almost like an attaboy saying, yeah, we like that kind of support in that general direction. However it comes out. But you can state it more along those lines. But I do think that Angie's suggestion is right. It may be a nice thing to do in our bylaws, is to indicate that we have this range of votes and a range of categories that we can act within when we're acting as a board and voting.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
The legislative meeting has been an interesting conversation for the 4 years that I've been on the board, right? And every year we try to go that route. We put together a flow chart the first year that I was in leadership, and we got a lot of pushback from almost every board member saying, don't tell me how to construct a motion. And so the difficulty that we face is that we are individual board members, and we have the ability to create motion. That is what we are elected to do, which is I move to blah, blah, blah. And how we choose to word that, how we choose to do that, there are recommendations, there are best practices, there are, gee, that would be really nice if you, but every board member has the opportunity to do something different. And then we as other board members have to react. And our only reaction is yay or nay. And so it becomes difficult to try and put too many parameters. I mean, we can put it in the bylaws, it can be changed again tomorrow, whatever. We've tried, and I would just say that some board members just have different feelings about how that particular meeting should run, and it's across the spectrum. Some board members feel that we should take positions on every bill, and some board members not any bill. But then you get up there and there's a lot of pressure from a legislator to take a position or a certain group to take a position. And so it changes from year to year, bill to bill. And so it becomes a very difficult scenario to control. And so it's how do we want to inform that conversation is a very difficult line to draw. And so to try and fit it into a box right now, I think is going to be a difficult discussion.
Yes.
And I do think, although I think Dave and I like the idea of being able to distinguish what's actionable or, you know, what's your responsibility to do versus advisory, it will get complicated because then you might end up spending 10 minutes anytime somebody wants to abstain trying to make that determination of whether this is something under your control or it's advisory. And if you look at the Constitution where you have general control and supervision, somebody could argue that anything related to public education is under your control. So I think that's why Board Member Lear was like, let's either say you can abstain or you can't. But I think at least if you did want to somehow say that you can abstain, except this is as narrow as I could get by saying it's on a bill or a proposal from a legislator on a fiscal, you know, I just throw that out to you as I think you're correct that it gets very complex because you have 15 board members who you could say on a different vote, Board Member Bolter might think it is advisory and you think it's actually part of code requirement that we do this. And
Which is why I like the wording of that. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So that brings me back a little bit to her original motion, or the original bylaw change, I should say, that every board member is going to be different at any given time. And do we allow the flexibility for a board member to be flexible,
Right.
instead of a hard yes or a hard no?
Because it goes back to Board Member Belknap's argument that for whatever reason, they may feel the need to abstain. They've done all the preparation, but something new came up. Yes.
Yeah, and I would just, as a reminder, we do not follow Robert's rules under this circumstance, and that we are a no vote, and I don't think board members realize that an abstention is a no. And so when we put in our bylaws the ability to abstain, then it gives the feeling, the idea that somehow I am abstaining, right? I'm not counted, I'm not part of this, but you are, because we are required to have a quorum, a majority of the board, whether you're present or voting or abstaining or not. And so that's my only concern, is when we go that route. And I think it's been a problem, not a problem like something to be resolved, but I think it's been a underlying feeling of board members over the last few years that somehow that I'm not participating for a reason, but you are participating.
Right. And I understand that, which is why I don't understand this change, because even during the legislative session when I abstained, because I didn't feel comfortable at the point taking a position, I knew that I was counted one way or the other, but at least in the minutes it was recorded that I did abstain. And then if asked by a legislator, I could tell them why.
Does the public understand that that an abstention is not a true abstention? And so that's where I think we get to, you know, what's recorded in the minutes and what's truly understood about something. And so just saying that, you know, you can say I abstained, but does the public recognize that you actually, that was a abstention is an essential no. So.
Board Member Belknap.
This is probably a squirrel comment, but maybe we need to change the statute. Have somebody help us change statute.
That's true. Okay, so let's vote on the amendment to postpone. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? No.
No.
Okay, motion passed unanimously. Failed. Failed. It failed unanimously. Okay, so now we're back to the original motion and amendment.
And before you make that, I just want to clarify. So the language in purple is what Board Member Lear proposed, and then the language in blue is what Board Member Bolter, her amendment was, if you're to add the blue language. So the language is all board members present at a meeting shall vote when a vote is being taken by the board. And then if you if you vote for Board Member Bolter's amendment, the added language would be a board member may abstain from voting if the purpose of the vote is to take a position on a legislative, and maybe it should be legislatively numbered bill, or fiscal proposal of a legislator or legislative committee.
Okay. Any further discussion to that amendment? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed 2-3. 3-2. My gosh, I'm having issues today. Okay.
So now it's been amended. You need to vote on the whole.
Now we need to vote on the whole thing.
Example of what?
What are you going to abstain? Just teasing. I think in there in the purple we need to have it reference the conflict of interest part too. That was part of it, right, Ben? When Brittany changed, she took off.
Right. The amendment was that what Brittany said, all board members present at a meeting shall vote when a vote is being taken by the board. And then it should say except as noted in bylaws.
Oh, for the conflict of interest?
For the conflict of interest.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sorry, and did you write something?
That's right. Okay, so now we need to vote on the whole thing. So any further discussion on this proposal? Okay, seeing none. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? No. I still don't like it. But the motion passed unanimously 4-1. Oh. Right. 4-1. I think so. Okay.
You want to make some motion? Okay, we got item number 1 done.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Wait.
So the
Okay.
question is, do we want to come back? We have a time certain for Tooele County School District's 4-day week request. Did you want to go to that right
Yeah.
now? And that's Superintendent Scott, right?
Yeah, since they're waiting, so we're going to hold off for a second and go to item 2.4, since that is a time certain item. And this one is Tooele County School District 4-day week request. And we've got Superintendent Scott Rogers. Yes, come just up here with the mics. And then was there anybody else that you wanted to come forward with you? Okay.
Pull up a chair and join. Okay.
Okay. Yes,
Madam
go
Chair
ahead.
and members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to address you. And we know we sent you a pretty big packet. We feel like we've been very thorough on this consideration. We're here to ask you for permission to move forward with a 4-day week for 3 of our 25 schools. Just let me introduce who I have with me here. Mark Ernst, who's the area or cone director for Grantsville. And that includes not just Grantsville, but our remote areas. And then I have Board President Marisa Manzione. And then behind us we have Assistant Superintendent Dolene Pitt. And first of all, before I make comments about that, and we certainly want to answer your questions, I just want to thank you for your advocacy and leadership this session. And we are extremely supportive of the State Board and the process, your constitutional responsibility and role in providing great education for the students of Utah. So you have our full support, and we especially appreciate, not supposed to have favorites, but we especially appreciate Board Member Linda Hansen. And I can tell you, we've been on a lot of trips. Linda's been with me out to Dugway and way out to Ibapaw. To give you a little perspective, our county is I mean, it's not just the three larger cities of Tooele, Grantsville, and Stansbury, but we have 7,500 square miles. Our furthest school is Ibapaw out on the Go Shoot Reservation, and it's a 320-mile round trip from the district office. And of course, we have to the south towards Vernon, almost into Juab County, we have a small 2-classroom school in Vernon Elementary, and then we have the safest school in Utah on Dugway High School, because it's already guarded by M16s, because you've got to get in through the gates to just get in there. So, but Dugway, and I will tell you, you know, the base, the Army base there, they're on a 4-day work schedule, so Monday through Thursday. Really ends up being a ghost town as far as adults and support systems and things like that on a Friday. So for different reasons that we want to talk about today, we feel like we've analyzed where we're at on school grades, on academics, on scheduling, on issues around attendance, and we feel really strongly about the transparency and our stakeholder input that the board has gone through, where we feel comfortable petitioning you to approve our plans to move forward with a 4-day week for those 3 schools. The rest of the schools in the district will stay on the traditional 5-day week. I want to turn the time over, though, to Mr. Ernst, who's the area director, who can talk about some of those data points. I think you've all received that packet, and apologize for the length of that. But to us, it was real important that we made sure we were ensuring the best possible education experience for those kids in those mostly remote areas of Tooele County. So.
Yeah, and I won't go over a lot of the details because I know those have been provided. One thing that we do know is those schools, so Ibapaw Elementary, Vernon Elementary, and even Dugway High, because of their small size, they haven't received a school grade over the last few years because they're so small. However, as we've looked at the data points, we realize that academic achievement is lacking in those areas. One thing that regularly happens in those schools is students are pulled out either a part day or a full day, and a lot of it is travel time to get into the city for a lot of medical needs or whatever the case may be. The other thing that we found is we did our research we were having more absences, that we had more kids missing school than our absences showed, and we were curious as to why that was. And then what we learned was a student, especially an elementary school student, attendance would be taken in the morning and the student was there. Parent would come at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, pull them out, and so they were actually showing as being in attendance, but they were only in attendance for just a couple hours, and their parents would leave them out. Largely that happened on Fridays in the schools, and especially in Dugway, because the parents didn't work, so they would sleep in a little bit and then come and get their schools and do what they needed to do family-wise. So part of the purpose of the 4-day week is to increase attendance, because it provides a day when families can go and do what they need to do as a family. But it also, and so by doing so, it's more teacher contact. The students will have contact with their teachers for longer during a week because they're not missing the time.
Let me just add,
you bet.
if you're a student in Ibapaw, there's a contract with the tribe. They come actually to Salt Lake. They can't come to Wendover or Tooele for medical, so they would drive not just the 320 miles round trip, but they would actually come into Salt Lake, because that's where they have their contracted medical and dental services from the tribe. So it's quite a trip, over 5 hours for them to just travel and come in and then return to their homes.
We held several meetings where we gathered stakeholder input. They were able to address the board. Strong support from all 3 communities for the 4-day week. We also did surveys, which we included those responses. So, anything, Marisa, if you want to say anything?
Sure. Our number one goal as a board is academic excellence in our district, and as a board, we really support this because we feel like we've tried a lot of things in these communities and it hasn't worked. And because the stakeholders have come to us in mass, in mass as a small community can, and sent petitions and emails saying that they would support this and they would commit to keeping their family activities, medical appointments and such on Friday so that their kids would be in school more. We feel like this is supporting not only their communities but their students and hopefully helping to achieve our goal of academic excellence. We're in full support. We feel like we've done our due diligence, in the community, and we want to give it a try and see if we can help these kids do better in school.
We're very aware of the research and the pros and cons. We looked at it from not just academic, that was our primary thing, but we also looked at savings. And you see in the research literature kind of a mixed bag. And most of the white papers said, if you're going to move to this schedule, do it academically because it makes sense for parents and communities and with regard to academic achievement, and don't look at just the financial picture. We're going to save a little bit of money on some classified employees, on busing, and on, because you have one less day to travel, and on food service preparation. But for the most part, I would say roughly the estimate was 1 to 2% at the most as far as savings. And so we just want you to know that each community, although they're very rural for a different reason, we're recommending to move in this direction. We're trying to, we have about 50 students, according to our surveys, that go to Tintic School District from Vernon. It's about the same distance from Vernon to Tintic as it is Vernon to Tooele, or Vernon up across this winding pass if you've ever been out to Dugway. And one of the things that they said on their survey was that they chose to go to Tintic. There's about 50 of them, and Idaho didn't allow this, but Utah allows, by statute, buses to come in from another district and bus students to another district. And we're okay with that parent choice, but they said to us, because we're a rural ag community in Vernon, we prefer going to Tintic because we work our kids. So we would really like those kids back in Tooele County, and that's one of the reasons that the parents said that they really appreciated Tintic School District being able to go on that academic schedule. The other thing that we're facing is really the whole recruitment retention issue and high turnover in rural areas for teachers. We feel like this could be possibly a recruitment tool to get some of those teachers to stay. I know we have a hard time in Native American areas. We weren't eligible for that grant that San Juan did. We have the same kind of problems keeping teachers at Little Ibapaw. You have to go into Nevada to get there. And we're thinking, that might be something we can help with retention and teacher retention recruitment efforts. So we feel like we've been pretty comprehensive and thorough in our analysis. We're aware of, especially of, longer days and the impact on younger kids. And we're aware of the research on ELL students, English language learners. Of course, we know we're cutting from 5 academic mornings to 4 academic mornings, and we're lengthening the day, and we're going to happily come back to you if it's approved and report and look at our benchmark testing, and hopefully we'll be trending in the right direction within a year, and annually come back and report to you on how we feel like this has benefited students.
I do feel like in that, in our presentation with the communities, though, we did present that fairly, that information and the research based on longer days, and the community was still very much in support of going to this 4-day week. They feel like it would be better for their kids, and in the end, we did too. So
for us, it's, listening to parent choice and parent feedback is important, and those community councils who are part of moving those schools forward. We've been kind of frustrated with things that we've tried and haven't worked, and this is something we feel that there's good justification for us to move forward if with your approval. So.
Any questions? Okay, Board Member Lisa, coming.
I have 2 questions, and they're very different spectrums. One, how does this affect those children who, Title I kids who are receiving free lunch scenarios? when their parents aren't home during the day. I know there's that support at the schools. And the second one is on the opposite spectrum. How does this affect high school kids with concurrent enrollment and on Fridays, and where's the support for that?
Yeah, two great questions. So on the school lunch, one thing that we've talked about, and we're actually doing this in some of our other elementary schools, is we can provide basically a to-go lunch where the kid would have that. They would take that home with them Thursday when they leave, and that would provide them lunch on Friday. Hopefully they hold on to it and don't eat it all Thursday night. Yeah. Yeah. But that is one thing that we've talked about. We've done that in some of our other elementary schools, and that's been successful. So we could implement that program there. Anything else on that one? Your other question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So what would the cost be to that? And then also, do you ever send to-go boxes for weekends for kids as well?
We do that for weekends.
So what would be the additional cost to doing a Friday to go?
It actually wouldn't cost us because those areas qualify for free breakfast and free lunch,
But
at least in the IBAPA,
so
area. So it's different for IBAPA than it is for...
Logistically, I'm really thinking, right, so here you have people who come in and either you make lunch at the school or it's brought in.
Right.
Who's going to literally do that? I think that's going to be some sort of additional time or maybe different.
There probably would be some added costs. We haven't calculated those at this point in time, but our food service department would do the preparation. We are a district that qualifies because of our numbers for free breakfast and free lunch, and so we thought we could do that. The other thing we thought the Fridays could be used for is we would have some staff. We're looking at some staff that we would be able to stagger or pay additional stipends to be able to do some intervention time on Fridays. So that's the difficulty when you look at, well, your buildings are going to be closed. They're really not going to be closed. They may not have the same heat and lighting levels or usage levels, but small group intervention could be incorporated into those Fridays. So that's where it gets a little bit funny in terms of the cost savings, and some people have said, yeah, we've been able to save 5%. Well, you better shut down your school completely and have no utilities going and have nothing happening. With Dugway High, that's going to be impossible because they still participate in UHSAA activities on Friday, and we're going to do exactly what they did in Tintic and other districts where they really protect the school time, and they just say, hey, you don't leave for, and we don't have any games during the school period of time, so you really have to protect that, according to Superintendent Hughes. You really have to protect that face-to-face instructional time so that you're not having activities that are, put on the top of that. But
yeah, the second question you had, concurrent enrollment. This was one of our concerns as we presented to our board, and as we presented to the community, and what those students and parents, they understand that if their student is involved in a concurrent class that meets on Friday, if that's the day off, then they would be required either to come to school for that time period. They're all broadcast, so they'd be broadcast to the school. So they'd be required to come to school for that broadcast time, or at the very least be responsible to gather the work and still get the material that they missed. So it would be required. Some of them would still have to come on Friday if they have that concurrent class.
We currently have we went to the 5x5 schedule. JUAB and Spanish Fork, some of the schools across the state have done that very successfully, and we felt that would give our students more opportunity to take CTE classes, electives, and shorten the 90-minute period down to something a little more reasonable so you could teach bell to bell a little bit better. But in the process of discussing that, we have different needs with our tech center. It's not like we're not like Salt Lake where you can bus from Highland east and west in 5 minutes to your tech center. To try to bring IBAPA or Windover High School or Dugway into a tech center. And so we deliver all of that, not with them coming in by bus, but we deliver that all electronically. So it actually saves some time, but we've tried to align our schedules so that we have minimal conflicts between those schedules and our concurrent enrollment. So we're all on a similar schedule. So it allows for that Monday through Thursday without being interrupted. We don't lose the transportation time that some other districts do. But we are going to have to work around the Friday situation with the concurrent enrollment and CTE classes that are being broadcast. So not just the college stuff, but those kids really haven't had access to a lot of the stuff we have at Tooele and Grantsville and Stansbury anyway, just because of the remoteness. So we've really had to lean on the whole EdNet system to deliver those classes.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So you talked about an extended time period during the day. So about how much time did you add to your elementary bell schedule, and how much time did you add to your high school? And can you explain that you're 5 by 5? What is it? Sorry.
It's an AB. Excuse me. That's a great question, Board Member Cummings. It's a 5-period day in an AB rollover, and we were doing a 4 by 4, which is 4 periods one day, 4 periods, so 8 total periods. This is 5 classes each day, but an A and a B, kind of a block. So
we added, it's about a half hour each day. The high school day would be 6.5 hours. The elementary day is also 6.5. Elementary would start at 8:05, end at 3:20. And then high school would start at 7:50 and end at 3:25. So the high school day is really, that's about an hour and 10 minutes added. And the elementary day, yeah, about the same.
we did that with hours, minutes requirements in mind, and of course the exception we're asking for is the day requirements. So, but we took the overall requirements for minutes and made sure that we had covered those instructional minutes.
Okay.
And what we did on that is we really mirrored what Tintic School District is doing, because they have had some success with 4-day weeks. So we borrowed their bell schedules. A few on the big calendar, if approved, we'd have to adjust to meet our district calendar. But as far as the daily bell schedule, we mirrored what Tintic School District is doing.
Okay, did you have a follow-up?
If that's okay. When you decided how much time to add, is there, I know you mentioned studies on too long or too short. What was the decision-making point in only adding a half an hour per day and not more? And then also, you mentioned using Fridays for, making sure that families were dedicated. Are you also using your Fridays for like teacher days, et cetera, and so that in your calendar that you're not actually adding more days off during those four school days?
Correct. Yeah. So
No, go ahead.
So as far as the time, like I said, the time really was based off the Tintic School District bell schedule and the successes that they've had there. And also because so many of our families in Vernon especially, they're familiar with the Tintic bell schedule, and that schedule has worked for them. And so that's why we mirrored that one. The second part of your question.
It's teacher work days.
Oh, teacher work day. Yeah. So there will be, the teachers will not necessarily have every Friday off. They will be required to come in, and that's where they will do their planning time. They may have some Fridays off, but it wouldn't be every Friday of the month that they would have off.
Yeah, right now in the district on the traditional schedule, we do for PLC time and for prep time we use half day on Wednesdays. So that will be altered at these schools so that we make sure that teachers get adequate prep time, but that we have time for intervention, tier 1, not just tier 1 instruction, but tier 2 and 3 interventions. So.
And in our current schedule, as is, nearly all of our teacher work days or professional development days are on Fridays already.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So, two more different spectrum questions. Okay. When it comes to busing, how long are the students on the bus? I mean, if an elementary student is getting up at 6 in the morning to catch a bus and they're not going to get home until 6 at night, that's a 12-hour day, right?
Yeah. It's not that long.
I mean,
so you had one question over here that was, why did you only go a half hour more?
And I'm sure.
For that very reason that you just brought up, because we could have asked for longer time, but we had to consider how much time kids were away from school. And so, we don't have 12-hour days for kids on buses.
Okay.
They're already busing, and I think you could argue that, well, they're spending more time on the bus collectively in a week if you bus them 5 days than if you just bus them 4 days. So
Right.
if you look at the aggregate amount of time that they're on buses, rural kids, 5-day week, they're on buses for a longer period of time. Now, you got 4 slightly longer days versus 5 days where you're on at least for an hour.
But these are very remote locations. So
That's why I'm asking,
In
are you-
Ivanpah, our bus driver is there. So he just goes the little loop of Ivanpah. It's not a ton.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
And
so it's
he
not an
doesn't-
hour drive into the school, or no?
They live on the reservation, and the school
Okay.
is right
The school's
outside
right
the
there.
reservation.
Instead
Okay.
of driving these remote areas into, metropolitan, or not metropolitan,
they're
whatever.
rural.
Remote into rural, suburban bedroom community to Salt Lake. They're living out there, so their bus routes aren't.
Well, I just didn't know
Very
how
long.
far away from the school they're
Right.
living out, because I know in San Juan they've got
Right.
students that are.
The longest,
Dugway is an hour out.
trip is none of our bus routes are more than an hour, so we don't
Okay.
have similar kinds of problems that they do in San Juan. But it's probably through Skull Valley up into Dugway. That's probably the longest trip because the kids in Ivanpah live on most.
I don't. Do you know?
That's
It's a half an
probably-
hour.
About a half hour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
40
wow.
minutes maybe tops.
Okay.
The problem is the remoteness of those schools from civilization,
Right.
not
Not
where
the
they're
bus.
living in respect to their
The
schools.
school. Okay. The second one, have you thought about blended learning at all?
Absolutely.
And incorporating that and how,
Right. So we contract with a company called Edgenuity. We also have one of the largest. I guess we're not as large. We have 2,000 Blue Peak Online students, MyTech High and Blue Peak Online. We have Edgenuity for our students in district. So as far as blended learning, I mean, we use Canvas across the district, and we're trying to get all of our courses on Canvas so that we can offer that a lot more. We received a grant through what was Title VII and turned to Title VI, Indian Education. We received a grant to get a hotspot on our bus in Ivanpah so that the Native American students, because Ivanpah only has K-6, so the students that are 7 through 12 come into Wendover. Well, that's about an hour trip, and we didn't want to waste that time, so we received a grant to get a hotspot and get them all one-to-one devices. The other thing I would say is all of our remote schools. Right. As good as that, but those schools are all at one-to-one. We don't have one-to-one devices right now in Stansbury, Grantsville, and Tooele, but we do at all of our remote locations because we thought that's a way that we can extend the learning day. We send those home with students. So we're trying to address, kind of a blended personalized learning model out, especially in our remote areas. So.
Okay. Board Member Warner, I believe you had your light on.
I would like to make a motion that we approve Tooele County School District's 4-day week request.
Okay, so the motion on the table is that we approve Tooele County's 4-day week request for those 3 schools. Any discussion to the motion?
Yes,
Board Member
please.
Belknap.
I wrote all my questions down. I've been patient. Okay. I have a concern with having teachers come in on a Friday when they've already put in all their quote unquote hours, and now you're going to require them to come on Friday. Are you going to pay them some additional pay to come on a Friday?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's already in play.
We can't violate our negotiated agreement, so
Well,
we would have to work around those hour requirements for teachers so that we either comp time or we pay additional stipends.
Okay, and then I have another question. Sidebar. MyTech High and who do you work with?
Blue Peak Online, which is our I'm sorry, Edgenuity.
I know about Edgenuity.
Yeah.
And I know about MyTech. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion from board members? I believe Board Member Linda Hansen asked permission to come up and make a quick comment. So I'm going to allow her that.
Thank you. I was at the board meeting where they talked to, the interesting thing when they talked about these 4-day weeks, parents came for hours and hours and hours to board meeting. This is really important to them. And so, and I also wanted you to know that I local Board of Education is fantastic. And they've done all their homework on this. They've talked to everybody. They've done everything that they needed to do. And so I fully support this. So these towns are really tiny. Ibapa's about 150 people. Vernon, 250. And then Dugway's a little bit bigger, but then they have the issue with the military. So great communities to visit if you ever want to go out and visit some really rural communities. So
We have been offered Navajo tacos if we bring anybody out. So
it's well worth it.
The other thing I think is important to appreciate is we're really talking about if you totaled the enrollment from all three of these schools, we're talking about fewer than 200 students of our 16,200 students. So it really is.
They're very tiny.
Two classroom. One still has a bell that they ring kids in from on recess down in Vernon. So we're talking about those 200 kids who we've been struggling with to find ways. One-to-one, we've tried. I mean, we've gone the gamut to make a difference for them. So we feel like the added flexibility and listening to parent choice. I mean, we talk about local control and parent choice, and this is our opportunity, we think, to walk the talk. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Board Member Belknap.
Sorry, I now remember another thing. I didn't write it down. You're putting Wi-Fi on the bus. I know some places that have Wi-Fi on the bus, and then they park it in the community and leave that Wi-Fi on, so families who can't afford Wi-Fi can jump off of that and use it in their homes.
What we've done is
There's an idea.
we have a bus driver / custodian, lives in Ibapa, and so the 7th and 12th graders get on the bus with him, and then he works in Windover during the day, and then at the end of his day, he brings the kids back. So it has really helped keep the to and from miles down, and that's a real challenge for us when we're not reimbursed fully for the to and from miles, as you well know this year. Now, we did get a bump in that, so thank you for the to and from bump that we got this year on the legislative appropriation.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It looks like you've done a lot of your work, and I will be voting for this because I'm in full support of the local districts knowing what's best for your schools and your parents. So any further discussion to the motion? Nope. Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Motion passed unanimously. Thank you.
Just a quick question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Does this now go to the whole
It will
board
go
for
to the
a
full
vote?
board
Okay.
next month. Yes.
Next month. Okay. Thank you. Do we need to be here for questions? Would that be?
I would.
Okay.
Questions will come up,
Okay.
and hopefully board members will watch the video and look at things in that month, but they may still have questions.
We will be here. Thank you.
Yes, Board Member Belknap.
Superintendent, you probably won't be making a presentation. They will only ask you questions if they have them.
All right.
Thank you.
very much.
Okay, so now we'll go back to our board bylaws. And is it your turn for board bylaws, or did you not need to? Okay.
No, I'm just here for this.
Oh, okay. You were just here in support of them. Okay. So we will discuss now the Hansen proposal.
According to Lorraine, you wanted to add the advisory committees back into the
I'll go take a
to the
picture.
bylaws.
Okay.
So Angie has put this proposal up on the screen so you can see it. Essentially, during the last round of edits that we made to the bylaws, we had stripped the list of committees that the board appoints members to by resolution. Their board member Hansen felt there was good reason to include those in the bylaws and keep those in there, and so the proposal is just to put them back after we took them out.
Okay. Any discussion to this bylaw change? Okay, I'm seeking a motion. Yes, Board Member Belknap.
So moved.
Okay, so the motion before us is to put back in what we had struck out for the advisory commission.
Yes.
Okay, any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
And then there's one other bylaw proposal,
Yes.
which is, I'll allow Member Belknap
The
to
Belknap proposal.
explain her proposal.
Yes, go ahead.
Stay here, Ben, just in case. I thought you were getting up. Okay. A couple of outside committees I've been working on, they've been doing their calendars, and they're not sure when to schedule some of their meetings because we haven't made our calendar yet. And we arbitrarily picked April, but it seemed to make sense that by the end of April we should have a calendar ready for the next year. I have heard some comments that if it's a new board, what about them? Well, they'd already know what the calendar was. Anyway, I just think October is way too late to make a calendar starting in the next February. So I propose that we change that from October to April.
You don't want to push it a little bit later so we can. No.
No.
Why not June, July? Why April?
Because everybody else is making their calendars and they're trying to plan their next year.
Good.
I think we halt them. We didn't pass it, Linda. I think it's very. Oh, sorry, Chair.
Keep going.
Okay. They are looking to us to try and plan their schedules because it's in our education community and they want to be here and they can't make their calendars, so it's pushing them back. And so
Oh.
On a school calendar year. Is that what
really, April was arbitrary in the picking. I just think October is too late, and I think if you get into summer, it's too late to pick also because other people have already made decisions, and then we're messing with our education community's calendars.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Board Member Cummins.
I love the idea of creating a consistent calendar early in the year. My only concern is, as we have all learned, that we are one of 15 other actionable members, that as we set that calendar, we have to recognize that there may be the potential for change, especially in an election year, that we can set a calendar, and I think it's a great idea to do so, but making sure to communicate to the world at large that nothing is set, in stone. So
At least we have an idea. A pretend idea, if nothing else.
Okay, Board Member Cummins.
How soon do we know when the next year's set of conferences that are scattered around the nation come about, and how can we schedule that far in advance?
Like any conferences, 19s are out, aren't they?
Some aren't. Like NASB, probably we don't have theirs for 19. Some we would, but probably not all.
Okay.
Because they don't do that till their fall conference. But really, we don't work our board meetings generally around national
Right.
conferences. If you're trying to set it like the first Friday or whatever.
We have our own schedules to work around. I couldn't even imagine trying to add. Yes, Board Member Belknap.
I also.
Mike.
Geez, Lorraine, you turned me off. I like the idea of kind of how we did our calendar this year. That was always the first week except March and April because of the legislative session, and those are the only two that we didn't try and keep totally consistent. That doesn't mean something's not going to change by November this year either. So I appreciate Brittany's comment, but we've been pretty consistent this year, and I think it was helpful to our educational community.
Okay. Idney, yes.
Obviously, the last sentence in this is passive. I would recommend you make that active and identify who will provide the draft meeting schedule, whether that's board leadership, this committee, staff.
Okay. So we would need a motion or an amendment to that.
I think if you just said the board secretary shall provide it, and then she can coordinate
Okay.
with whoever would suggest that.
So the board secretary. Okay. If there's no further discussion, I am seeking a motion. Anyone? Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I move that we approve the changes to the calendaring in the board bylaws from October to April. and require the secretary to post it.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve the change for setting our calendar from October to April, and requiring that the board secretary shall schedule the approval. Any discussion to the motion? Yes, Board Member Belknap, and then Board Member
May I
Collins.
amend that slightly
Yes.
to include that for this year, that the board leadership have this be completed by the end of May?
You need to put that.
But it be on the May agenda.
I don't think you need to add that to the bylaws. I think you just make
Okay.
a separate motion.
Okay,
that
so, okay, thank you.
If approved, you'd make a
Okay.
separate motion to.
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay. Did you have? Oh, okay. Okay. So, seeing no further discussion, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Motion passed unanimously. Okay. And then now, do we need? That's true. It would have to be on the June agenda. Yes.
I just have a sidebar question. Ms. Lorraine, don't leave yet. So when we do our calendar for the year, we always include the next year's January in that, correct? On
Yes.
that approval? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 2.2, educator.
We're moving along in life.
We did take care of 2.4. Educator licensing rule revision plan. And Travis.
Do you want to do something, or do you want me to? Nothing.
Well, good morning. I'm Travis Rawlings, the Educator Licensing Coordinator for the board, and I feel like most of you should be tired of seeing me this week. And unfortunately, based on this plan, it may get worse, is kind of what I've been concerned about. So in response to R277-501 moving forward, we've taken some time and put together a plan on how we should move forward with the rest of the licensing rules, and there are quite a few. And so there's the document in board docs, should have the timeline, and just going to bring it up. But essentially, what we're trying to do is we wanted to present this to you so you understood our general plan, and if that's something you approve and that's what you want us to do, great. If you think we should be doing something different, now would be the time to tell us. So this is what we think we should do, but obviously you're the board and we work for you, so let us know. And I'll just walk very quickly through this document, just the general idea. And so the general pattern involves, excuse me, four major steps. First, that we gather stakeholder input. We then write an initial draft rule. We distribute that rule for written comment, and then we make a final revision, and then it is presented to this committee. At that point, it becomes the board's, bylaws and rules of how you amend it and going from there. So everything up until then would be more fluid. Kind of honestly condensing what we've done the last 4 months into a very short period of time. As you can see from this, if we want to we follow this type of a pattern and these timelines, if we want to present a new rule for you in June, we need to start last week on that rule for this pattern. And honestly, I have started that. I'm setting up stakeholder groups for next week, assuming you approve this plan. If you don't, then I'll just cancel. And then we'll be moving forward. But I tried to present this essentially so you could see you've got just colors and you can kind of see where it goes. But essentially, based on the timeline that I pointed out, it's basically going to take us 2 months to do a rule. And that's to get it to you. And as soon as we get that rule to you, then I'm starting to work on the next rule, and you guys the board, the board is in ownership of that rule and taking it from there. And so letting me focus on the next rule. Are there any questions about the general pattern or how I've laid this out, or any thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
It's a fantastic plan.
Oh, thank you.
Well communicated. I do have a couple questions. One, that you have your initial board and stakeholder input for a couple of weeks. What is your plan? Because it doesn't look like it's going to be on a board committee agenda at that time. What is your plan to receive board input, as well as, I'm guessing you've considered it, but I'd like to hear why we're doing one rule at a time, because some of those stakeholder people are going to be very similar for every one of those rules, and why not gather input for multiple rules at a time?
Those are very good questions. So the first question is how was the anticipation of getting that early board feedback? That early feedback will take the form of the focus groups like we did last summer. And so my thought was, what we would do is we would distribute to the board the questions that we're asking in those feedback groups. And that way board members could respond to those questions in writing, and I could incorporate that with the focus groups. That was the idea there. The other one is, you're absolutely right that a lot of these stakeholder groups are going to overlap. What I'm concerned about, quite frankly, is staff resources. You'll notice later on it does talk about you could actually shorten this timeline by overlapping the rules. But my struggle is with our focus groups right now, they're like 2-hour meetings. And if we try to cram more and more into those, I think they could become less productive. So that's why I built it the way it was. But that's not to say we couldn't do what you described.
I have a question. I really like that you put together this plan, and we're definitely going to be seeing a lot of each other. Yeah. My question is as you're going through the rules, if you see that one rule is now obsolete or not needed because it's essentially absorbed by another, then is that also part of this plan?
Yes, if you scroll down a little bit further.
Oh, okay. You've already done quite a bit of that.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of describes which rules have a lot of changes that are likely to be made. You'll notice this is a mea culpa for me. 527 probably should be incorporated into 501. 527 is the International Guest Teacher License. We haven't talked about that at all, about how we want to handle that. And so that really should be as part of 501, but I didn't do it, so we're going to have to do it later. But you'll notice that it is looking at combining several different rules. Some of these rules will be more challenging than others. I mean, that's just 504. Combining that with a couple other rules is going to be a massive undertaking. That's going to take a lot of work. That's why it's one of the first on the schedule, those kinds of issues. But we're very aware that some of these rules haven't been touched in a while. I mean, like the highly qualified rule, we continued it last year because we had to, but now it's obsolete. We can simply repeal that and to go from there. That was a bit rambly. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Okay, any other questions or motion? Board Member Belknap.
So piggybacking on Brittany's comment, is there any way to take maybe some of these rules that need very little input and combining them with those that need a larger discussion, and not doing every rule separate when we do our stakeholder initial input and combining a couple of them? That's just food for thought, I don't even
the only response I would give is when I created this plan, the intention was that the pattern is what we would do with the significant changes. That the minor changes, the no changes, the repeals would actually be done. Like, we wouldn't even follow that pattern. If we wouldn't need to get stakeholder impact other than just written general like we normally do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion. Board Member Cummins.
Chair, I move that we adopt the plan that has been proposed for the licensing rule revision plan and timeline.
Okay, so motion before the board. Oh, do we not take
It's an
action?
information item if you'd
Oh,
like to
oh,
take
it's an
action.
information?
Yeah. Basically, we wanted to present this to get any
Well,
feedback
then,
you had.
never mind. I redact my amendment.
Well, then we could do a committee action to have you guys move forward, or do we just say,
We
good
wouldn't
job,
need an
keep
action.
going? Thank you.
Good luck is probably the right words to use.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Yes, Board Member Belknap?
I have one thing on the back mapping example,
Yeah.
and I realize that it's an example, but it looks like it's gospel. So I'm not really sure how to make this like say, even though it says does that make any sense? The following example gives the key dates, but it looks like these are absolutes.
Oh, it was only presented in that way to give you the information as easily as possible.
I know.
But
So you could say subject to flexibility.
Well, but I know this isn't what it is. That's okay. It's just me. It's fine.
I would welcome any additional feedback that you'd like to give me.
I'll make it something later.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? Okay, thank you, Travis. Okay, 2.3, Early College Coursework Committee recommendations. And we've got Garrett Rose and then Jennifer. Oh, is she on her way? Okay. Yep.
Okay, so I'm Garrett Rose. I'm the secondary English language arts specialist and early college specialist in teaching and learning. And a long time ago, I was asked to chair this committee, the Early College Coursework Committee. And so I think we're about 1.5 years into it. And so what we've come forward with you today is our committee recommendations. And what we're asking is what you've seen on the document, what you would like us to prioritize for future action towards increasing this equitable access. And so we've broken it down into a few different categories. We have policy revisions, new practices, proof of concept, funding recommendations, and professional learning. But based on all of these recommendations, there's about 21 or so. We wanted to get feedback from you about which ones to move forward with, and which ones that feel like we could maybe put off for a little bit. We want to move forward with all of these, but we want to get the priorities that you recommend for us to move forward.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Power is important.
Sorry. Okay. Yes, Board Member Belknap.
Well, Garrett, Jennifer, I think there's nothing you can do until we do some policy revisions.
Okay.
So part of it is which ones would you like done? And there's definitely, so in terms of the 5 categories, really looking at, you can do parts of those categories, you can do all of the category, you can say we don't even want to attend to this one at all, really just giving us future direction of where to come. And so if part of it requires policy revision, we would bring you the policies that would need to be revised for your feedback and amendments, and then proceed with those. Some of them really require some rule changes and some policy to say we don't want different registration cards happening in schools. We're going to put it in board rule that you can't have different registration cards for kids to keep them out of particular courses, which is how it is right now.
These
For
are
example.
findings that we've come across.
Okay. Board Member Belknap.
Just follow. Okay, Jen. So, but are there any rules that we need to be looking at to even have you begin?
Not necessarily, no. For example, if we wanted to do the pre-AP pilot, that would be more saying, okay, we're going to have to go and seek funding in the legislature next session to do that. So it's really
Okay, so they're
knowing
side
which
by
ones,
side.
yeah,
Okay,
knowing
all
which
right.
ones to act on. So we might have to come back to you and say, okay, you wanted us to do this. Here's what it would take to do that. But none of this is really saying, okay, run and do these things. It's more saying, we'll come back to you with the action steps that might be required to do that particular. We just didn't want to go so deep when you're like, don't waste your time on this strategy. We don't think that's a great one to go with. So we started really vague, got a little more specific now, but there would be additional specificity we would bring back to you on any of these recommendations.
Okay. So do we have any recommendations or maybe what we would think of as a priority. Or if you guys have Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Can I ask a
Yes.
quick question then? Because not all of this is necessarily board actionable. And so do you want us to just talk about the priorities that you think the board should be taking? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things we can do, for example, we can share innovative strategies, including effective practices that are going on. But generally, when we have like a best practices document, at some point it's a document that would come back to you all to say, are you good with what's in it, to share with the field. So some of these are just saying, that sounds like a great one, but we'll review it later. Others are, we would like to see policy around this so that we get emails once in a while on, for example, I go back to the registration card just because it hits me as a person, that if you have a particular status, you do not get the same registration card as your friend who doesn't have that particular status. So for example, if you're an English learner in some of our schools, you get a different registration card than others that puts you on
instead of biology.
on a more limited pathway than other students because you have a particular category. So we would like to see that personally prevented so that every kid gets the same thing. You can asterisk and say these might be useful for if you are in this particular status, but not necessarily keeping you out of a gateway to a particular course because it's not even on your registration card. And unless you're really aware of those courses, you may not even think to consider, like, why is that on my registration card? So there's things like that that I have more passion because I don't think kids should be kept from particular courses because they have a label of some sort, where others would require funding. So it would be more you guys saying, yep, go ahead and work with legislators to see if they'd be interested, and kind of us starting that pathway. Ultimately, it would still come back to the board of supporting those funding initiatives for next session as you guys work through what you really want us to be supportive of, but we can start on that kind of work. In terms of some of the things from a perspective of what's working, looking at validating the effectiveness of some of the models that people are using so that one, we can validate them, and two, if they really are valid practices, that we can expand them on a more statewide scale. So in the proof of concept box, for example, the green section, we have things like AVID, Content Link, models of co-teaching, and the Summer Bridge program, which seem to be really great mechanisms to enroll students who typically are not enrolled in these courses, but not only enrollment, but being successful in those courses so that they're building the skills and knowledge that they need to have more adequate access so that they can not only take the course, but pass the course and earn credit for that course. So those strategies are things that we have seen working, but we would like to kind of validate them with data and then use those to kind of share with the field that these practices seem to be working. You might want to further consider these in your own LEA. Because AVID is in only a couple of districts. Content Link is unique to Park City. Co-teaching is kind of global, but Canyons does a more strategic method with that than others. And then kind of that Summer Bridge program that Park City has to try and help students kind of transition to high school. But sometimes people say they work. We'd like to validate them with data, for example.
Right. Board Member Cummins?
Outside of, programmatic requests for legislative funding, there's a lot of just things in these recommendations that would take staff work. And I'm just curious if you've considered the current budget and how much of this could be taken care of in the current budget, and how much of this do you think would need extra funding for USBE to accomplish it?
So one thing we have been seeking, and we've just been waiting to hear from finance, is to get someone to be truly over college and career readiness, or having an early college specialist. Garrett currently serves in that capacity, but he is also the secondary ELA specialist, the Centennial person, the APIBCE person. Like, his job is very diverse, and you don't have as much time to dedicate to what this would really take to really do the focused work. We used to have a position that was this, but that went away how long ago? You remember best.
About a year and a half.
Yeah, because you've been doing it that long.
Said, hey, let's do this.
Let's do this. So that would be one particular thing. We've been sharing kind of the load right now, just amongst ourselves and Momi and Christelle and Kim, just because it is such work, and we're all kind of spread thin, so we all take a little part of it on to kind of share the load. That would optimally be of benefit, and as far as we know, we've been getting positive feedback that they think that could happen, which could really put someone to focus on this work, and that would take local funding, but it sounds like we might have the possibility there. Otherwise, we'd have to divvy these up and say, okay, Jennifer, you go work on this particular one. Garrett, you take this one, and kind of share the load across ourselves to kind of promote some of these things. Some of them don't take any money. For example, like sharing the innovative strategies, we could really do that work through a committee work group. Go for it. Oh, sorry, I don't get to direct.
Yes.
I'm so used to facilitating meetings.
No, yes.
Well, it's kind of like that sixth grader like yesterday, right? She's already in charge. Does that fit under what you were just like sharing best practice? Would that go under you lead?
Possibly. We talked about that with that connection to having that role in place that they could potentially help. They could also help with the proof of concept around proving out some of these strategies. So we have discussed that as a potential, not knowing where that position's really leading and what other work you might have in mind for them. But we did discuss that in our team of this might be some great work for that new position to really validate some of these strategies and have that best practices shared with the field, because sometimes it's not that they don't want to do these things, they just haven't crossed paths.
And this would require a lot of field work, and it would give them a chance to really dig deep and see what these are, to see if these would, be sustainable on a bigger scale, or recommend these to LEA, saying this is something that will work for your LEA, and here's the validation of this.
So maybe to make this more effective, if we go through each section, because I think it'll help us to see like what would it take. So let's just start with policy revision. So within what we've kind of come across is that there are certain gateways to advanced coursework. So for example, an English AP teacher might say, you need to read these 6 books over the summer in preparation to be able to even take my class. We see that as a gateway or a gatekeeper to access for particular students who don't have the opportunity, the resources, the time, whatever it might be, to actually do that. And really, is that a requirement of a course, or is that more of a teacher's preference of preparation for that course? So there's some particular gatekeepers that are really keeping particular students out of programs. Other things are just local decisions, like, oh, if you don't have a 3 on SAGE, you don't get to participate in this. And so lots of gatekeepers that aren't truly evidence that would make that student unsuccessful in this. For example, if you got a 2 in math, but you want to take English AP, could that prevent you? It's possible, because your SAGE scores aren't at a 3 or higher. So really looking at eliminating discriminatory prerequisites that really are just gatekeepers of keeping particular students out due to teacher preference or choice at this time. There's obviously maybe some prerequisites that make sense. Like there's a sequence and scope and sequence of courses that you might need to take a particular course before you take this one. But in terms of, well, you need to read all of these materials, or you need to have this external experience, that may be keeping particular student groups out of particular courses. And so that would be putting it into policy that LEAs cannot use prerequisites that eliminate participation due to kind of some of these restrictive practices. And then the next one, eliminate all registration procedures of those underrepresented students. We've just seen enough of that happening in our schools, and we went out and interviewed families and students, and that's where a lot of that feedback came from, is that there's just discriminatory practices happening in the schools. And I think a lot of it is just them trying to facilitate ease of scheduling, but it's really a discriminatory practice, and they're not seeing it that way just from their focus of why they're doing those things. So looking at also the USB rule of definitions, our rule for accelerated programs is very interesting. If you've looked at it recently, it could use some updating and refreshing. It's been a while since it's been approached. It doesn't really align with some of the more where we are nowadays in terms of acceleration. So there was some feedback on improving that and then amending the current funding. This one is probably a very interest that you might get feedback on from the field if we were to do this. Currently, you receive funding based on how many AP tests your LEA passes. Yeah. So the number of students that take the test and get a 3 or higher is how you get your money for accelerated programs. And so that leads to trying to enroll particular types of students to get certain outcomes, and doesn't really promote.
And it could even promote teaching to the test. And we're not saying that is happening, but that is a practice that could be, well, I've got to get these 3 so we can get our funding.
So looking at, we could still get, funding for points, so, how many tests you pass, but also looking at, does your enrollment match your student population, or is it similar to, or are you growing towards matching your population? So we have some districts that might have 30% of Hispanic or ethnic minority students in their
school, but they're enrolling 5% of their student population in the advanced coursework. So trying to promote this kind of equity in their enrollment into courses that matches their student enrollment more closely, and tying funding to them either working towards matching or matching, depending on how you guys might want to structure that. And we can bring some options. We just didn't want to take time, honestly, bringing you options if you are not even interested in changing how the funding formula works. And so this is where that guidance from what you would like to see would be helpful, because we're happy to come back with more detail on some of these. We just didn't want to waste your time with, here's 16 options, and you're like, we don't even want to talk about that today. So that's really what maybe that first section is. And Brittany's on the committee, so she can definitely speak to a lot of this.
Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So the second bullet under USBE rule policy options, as we can see from the current funding mechanism, that when you use money as an incentive, people comply, right? They figure out ways. So, you limit the students who can participate so that you can guarantee that you're going to get 3s, right? And so if we were to go a different direction and we match demographics, but schools aren't prepared to increase the number of students who can participate, now it's also a roadblock, because now we're forcing certain students to participate whether or not they're prepared for the class or they want to take the class, right? And so you start forcing things because we want to get funding for this particular program, and now other students may not be able to make it because for some funding, this is a limited amount of money, right? And so are they going to expand and add AP classes that may not be funded because now the funding is less if we increase it? And so I'm concerned generally, because anytime you use funding as that incentive, we fit it. We automatically just go and we make it fit so that we can get maximum money for it, whether or not it's the right decision to make for every student in that circumstance.
Well, and I think what we would need to do is, if this is one you guys want us to look forward into, is look at options, but also look at what are the potential pitfalls of that option and bring those clearly to say, if we want an increase, we also expect increased enrollment, what impact would that have on the schools? So thinking about kind of the pathway of the predictable failures, I guess is probably the best way I can say, and which ones are we acceptive of and which ones are we like, that's not acceptable and we don't want to go with that funding because of the anticipated consequence of doing that. Maybe that might be one way.
And so if I understand correctly, the requirement for how it's funding, is it in statute or rule?
It is in rule.
It's in rule, so the funding is there. We have just put
it's how we've determined.
Because I'd be curious to know what it would look like to have a more open funding mechanisms for AP that would incentivize, a really open system rather than, based on 3s. Because I think we can encourage quality teaching in other ways, and I think there's some other recommendations in here that the answer to that, but the payment is just a little bit more open on just number of students.
Well, and I'm wondering too, listening to the school grading conversation over in the Standards and Assessment Committee, maybe it's even having 4 or 5 strategies and they pick 2 or 3 of them that they're going to employ. So on how they want to receive their funding, to where we increase enrollment in diverse populations, but also like thinking about what's best for your LEA. Here are your options, and you get to pick 2 or 3 of those to kind of make your way for your funding. Instead of saying everybody has a blanket approach, each LEA has some unique features. Some don't have a huge demographic population to work with, and so it's a different work for them to be able to engage kids as a system than others might be. And so maybe having options.
So do we want to, Jess?
As a follow-up, maybe as we go forward with that it can't just be something that if you're going to increase a student population, then the whole program has to increase, right? Because if you increase this population, then obviously you're decreasing somewhere else in order to, if you only have a limited space, right? Your LEA is saying, I'm only going to pay for or facilitate 1 AP class. There's 30 seats or whatever you have available. And so if you're going to require or incentivize the increase of one population, then the entire thing has to grow, right? And so it's how do you allow for just growth in general so that more students have access to it, but you're not saying this group's going to have access, and now it's going to be more difficult for this student group to participate. And so it's just opening it up so that whatever funding and whatever funding does to incentivize enrollment, that it actually is just a growth mechanism and an increased growth.
Not detriment to one group for the sake of the others. kind of,
So
right?
do we want to have this one looked at, this policy revision, like be one of our top things for them to look at?
Basically what I see this being is we would bring you a rule with these kind of pieces, and then you can say, we don't really care about that one, cut that line, and bring you some options for what the current funding structures could look like moving forward and what they look like now. For example, if we put all of this into a policy revision, you'd still have the opportunity to say, you know what, after giving it some thought or talking with the field, we're going to let people keep their different registration cards. Not any of this would be set in stone, but all of those would require a policy kind of piece change. And so if we take this kind of orange section and we can work forward on that particular piece, that would just mean we'd bring you back a board rule with these 4 pieces in there for you to have further consideration and discussion around, if that seems reasonable. And seems like the field really is pushing for some changes in the funding mechanism. I think that has come out in every group we've met with. What that route looks like to be positive impact, I don't know, because we have not dug in. That discussion came up in every committee group that we've worked with.
And I think it's worth investigating those options for giving LEAs that have specific needs and saying, well, we don't have a demographic that we can really grow here, so we'll pick these 2 options. I think that would be something that would be very beneficial.
Interesting.
Okay. Did you have anything further, board member comments?
No, just when you asked if we wanted to prioritize, I think just the explanation of, I just wanted to make sure that we're not removing anything. If I was to have a problem with something or whatever, I think maybe as we go forward, just saying no, or let's remove that priority. But I think I just wanted to emphasize that when they do come back with this rule, that we don't limit it to things that may actually change the numbers, but not actually increase the number of students who are taking those courses.
Well, yeah, and we're also looking at, of course, we want to increase enrollments, but we want to sustain them as well.
Yep.
We want to sustain
Right.
that growth.
Yep.
Because who cares if we get increases for 1 year and then it goes back down to where we were. We want to see that growth sustained.
Okay. Any other board member? I can't see the. Okay. Board member Lisa coming. Well, it was behind her.
I have, sorry, it's big. I have lots going in my head right now, and some of this overlaps with your pillar 1 with parents, and we're talking about policy. Maybe it was under new practices or best practice, but communication is key. I mean, if parents and students don't know about these programs, it doesn't matter what you do going forward on this. Is a policy needed, is a rule needed for communication to the parents and how we get it out to the LEAs and to the parents and to the students?
There was definitely conversation around that. There's kind of 2 fields of thought when it comes to the parents. One, particular parent groups told us in these kind of stakeholder feedback meetings, they expect that the school is going to do the best for their child, and they expect the school to do it. Not saying that is but
this
there
is
are
information that we've gathered.
particular ethnic groups that believe that the school is the one that should be leading their child to the best pathway possible. Now, is that always happening? No. And so the other side of the house is we need to continue to build awareness for families and in ways that actually engage families that aren't currently engaging in this because they didn't have prior experience. If you didn't take an AP class or a CE class as a high schooler yourself, or you didn't go to high school, you're unlikely to know about these opportunities. And so we have some great models that we've seen that LEAs are doing that we could put in the best practices piece. But if you guys want us to bring a little language that shows, using what we know from best practice, what parent involvement looks like to kind of encourage awareness and enrollment and just knowledge building for families, we can definitely bring some kind of recommendation that you guys could review.
May I follow up on that,
Yes.
Michelle? It was Chair Bolger, sorry. So in the college and career counseling packet that was released last fall, I have several issues in that. But one of them is that there's a model in there, and it's a bullet point of who is involved with the student's education and college and career pathways. And parents are like second to the outside. They're not on the inside with the counselor. And for example, my son, he informed me that he already has his senior year planned and college ready, and I'm like, when was I invited to that conversation? It really bothers me. And so I've yet to pin down his feet to actually schedule a time to go into the counselor, because he's like so goal oriented and I'm second thought, right?
He's like, I'm good, Mom.
Yeah. So I don't want parents to be so disenfranchised from the process. On the outside as the last resort. They should be at the beginning with the counselor, with the student at the very beginning.
Well, and some of this even comes down to the middle school system, because a lot of what's going to happen starts earlier, and so that interplay.
They're tracking kids.
The trick is, where does this money go? Generally to the high school setting, and so that's the
right. But I think we're kind of backwards on involving parents there, and so
and we have some great strategies that some schools have been employing that we could share, and maybe that would help build some language for policy around what are the engagement opportunities that we facilitate for families to kind of get engaged in the process. So we could add that to this list, and then it's also would be in that new practices section around best practices on how to get families engaged in this process of being college and career aware.
Yes.
Yeah, and some of that is a language barrier. You know, I grew up in California where every form was done in 4 or 5 different languages, and so that could be something we could consider when we go back with this.
Well, and two, I mean, we talk about, I really hate government getting involved in family, but especially with the language barriers, the ELL students, the families that, just tell their kids to go to school, learn English, and then help with the bills at home. That really, I really want to help those parents feel more accepted into the community, and if we can help them by bringing in and teaching them, understanding what there is going to happen with their child, I think so there's not a disenfranchising.
In a language they can understand.
Yeah, because I think it's getting worse more than it's getting better, and so if we don't start bringing those parents in, we're not gonna.
Thank you. Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So many of the items under the new practices piece seem almost like a media campaign or something. Do you know what I mean? Like right now, we have a booklet. So if you want to be all these words come apart. If you want to have a counseling program that's stamped by the State Board of Education, what is that called? The counseling program that's CCR, College and Career Ready, and there's a certain booklet that comes out of what it takes to be a CCR, and there's funding involved, right? Is that true?
Where's mommy?
Yeah, an approved program, and there's certain standards that you have to meet in order to become that approved CCR program. Okay. So I guess my question is how much of these things are inside of that, and how much should be added in addition to that, as far as just like really pushing out, here is what a good quality counseling program looks like. How much does it involve the parent? How much does it include and these best practices? Because they're already, I'm guessing that CCR program is based on best practices.
Gotcha.
And so how much is already there and how much needs to be added to, and so can we kind of overlap some of that work with what some of these
not
points
reinvent the
were
whole thing,
brought
but like
out,
make some connections.
and then rather than creating all these best practices sheets, then you can do some communication that is almost like a campaign of, we are really focusing on said topic, ensuring that students have access to these college courses. And so how do you kind of just guide them towards those best practices that are already contained within documents and other programs that are already under the USBE and things that are already being working on. I think the only difference, there's a couple pieces here. The universal screening for gifted and talented wouldn't fall under that, I don't think. And I'm just curious what thoughts are on what that would take. Is that a board rule to create a universal screening, and do we really want to go that route? And then developing college and career standards, and I think the conversation around that was updating the middle school college and career, creating a K-6 college and career type standards, as well as the concurrent enrollment course. I think there was conversations about those three separate kind of conversations.
There's a few different pieces in this. They don't, like you said, there's some connected pieces. So I think the first bullet, even in the last couple of bullets around showcasing the practices of administrators and highlighting schools that are doing this work, comes out in a document such as the shared strategies, and making sure it's coherent is what I'm hearing around. We already have stuff in place. Let's not make it seem like it's new and unique, but it's like reinforcing and then adding to as needed. The universal screening, let me give you a little background on what that is. Currently, the LEAs are required to screen for identification of gifted students if they take Gifted Dollars, which is the accelerated program. The screening practices of current state can be discriminatory in enrolling students who are English learners, for example, when the tests are given in English, but they might actually be gifted in their native language, but it's hard because of our assessment tools. A universal screening practice would basically be all kids have a similar data set in their LEAs. All kids are taking particular assessments that the LEAs would then use to kind of filter using those assessments to provide a universal screening. So it's not adding more assessment, it's then determining within their assessment system they already have developed, how can we use these to start figuring out who we should be enrolling, or at least considering for further assessment if we want to dig deeper. Because right now that universal screening comes down to, there's no universal screening, but it comes down to teacher recommendation. So if you're well behaved and you seem smart, we'll probably give you that recommendation to go get tested for gifted. Is kind of how the practice works, especially in the younger grades. It's more about behavior oftentimes, and they seem to be a quick learner. There's certain traits that teachers look for in their identification, but that universal screening might allow to identify kids that aren't typically seen as your traditional gifted student.
Open it up.
Yeah, so that's where the universal screening, the literature around this is promoting in the world of gifted education. Universal screening gives you a more broad perspective of students who might actually be targeted population for determining gifted identification. And the current practices we have limit gifted identification to the traditional, what you would expect as your GT students. And so the universal screening practices, whether that's something you would like us to look into, what it would take, what the language would look like, what would the practice be, we can do that. This is just more, here are the ideas that came out of the committees. Whether you're interested in those or not is kind of what this conversation's around. If you would like us to come back and say, if we were to do universal screening, here's how that would change current practice. It would leave a lot of flexibility at the LEA level in terms of what their screening tools are, but it would kind of standardize that all kids are getting screened for gifted, not just the ones we would perceive to be gifted, which is kind of how practice is right now. It's more based on perception rather than maybe similar testing data across the system.
Also a cultural capital issue, where some parents may not know that, hey, there's an opportunity for the kids to be screened for some accelerated. So that universal screening would help assuage that concern and help give, like she said, students that may or may not fall into those categories a chance to see, oh, well, they do qualify for this. They are ready for this.
Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Got ideas swirling. Just,
I know, we've been doing this for months, and it's like, ooh.
Yeah. So so based on the conversation that just happened, how does that work with the competency-based education model? Would that be more defined at the local level then, and for that student, based on that gifted learning scenario?
Gotcha.
And the second question had to do with earlier, and I'll have to come back, answer that one, and let me.
Okay, so competency-based, I'm not sure. I'm not well-versed in the competency-based, so maybe, Diana, you can help me out. In terms of the competency-based, I would think would still be same practice as it is now in terms of if you want to demonstrate competency, you can, whether you're gifted or not, you still have access to demonstrating competency. You don't have to have a gifted identification. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Actually, even more prevalent in this space of identification, and that's been going on for years since the 80s.
Okay.
Curriculum compact and
Okay. So I did remember this, and it goes back to what Board Member Cummins was talking about with the CCR. And maybe this probably needs to be a whole separate issue, but when we talk about definitions, we really need to clearly define what we perceive as definitions, because there is a phrase in there, social justice, and the reference in there refers to a woman who's nationally renowned. She's a professor, and her social justice has to do with race and gender and a whole bunch of other things. So, and it's a very political hot topic. Whereas I know that other social justice has to do with Superintendent Dixon had her understanding of what social justice meant, and so two different ideas. But because social justice today is so politically hot topic and very decisive, and when it comes to implementing policy or statute, it's very it's not equitable. It's very it's not equal justice. So I just want to be careful on the definitions and really clearly spelled out on definition what you're meaning there.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the next one, the working on standardizing the forms. If you go to a particular college, the form can be easier or more complicated than another form. So, or USHE, I think this is one that's already USHE has identified as working towards, is to try and simplify.
On board. So Utah State's on board, and Sid Grew has been working with them, and she's built a form that's much more simplified, and it still needs refinement. It's still got a lot of work to do, but it is much more refined. But it's a matter of getting the colleges on board for that, and so that's something that I've been working with her, and she's still working on trying to get the different universities to say, you know, we'll.
Well, and that might be like more of a stamp of approval. The board supports a unified form.
I think that would be a great, yeah, I think that would be a great
more than anything, just saying UVU, BYU, Utah State,
Dixie,
do you really need very diverse forms to accomplish the same thing? And maybe you need 10% of the form can be different, but the vast majority of the form be the same. I think maybe it was it you or Jan that experienced the complexities of the form, and that even as an educated adult, filling out those forms can seem very overwhelming, let alone a parent who maybe doesn't have the same background and educational experience filling out those forms. So the simplicity of enrolling your child in concurrent enrollment should be more simple than it is. So that's that next bullet. And then the next one that I see kind of outstanding from a best practices type of tool is the Develop College and Career Standards and Awareness Concurrent Enrollment course. So building a course that basically helps do some of those counseling pieces, but as well as kind of helping kids to understand what the pathways are, what their options are, really kind of trying to build that. And as a concurrent enrollment course, that would give kids their first access to a concurrent enrollment course. So they would kind of learn more about those pathways and college readiness in this particular course. It would take developing some standards to go with that particular course. It could be embedded in that, okay, you have to teach these standards, but maybe in math, they're the ones responsible for teaching students about the different routes they can take, AP, IP, CE, or maybe in ELA, they're the ones talking to you about college applications or resume building or your college letter for schooling. And so there's ways to embed it or ways to have it stand alone, but also a K-12 curriculum where we start talking about college in kindergarten, that kids start to hear about this cool thing that happens when you graduate from school, so that there's this conversation around college and careers from the earliest age, so that it starts to become second nature. Like, it's not, am I going to college? It's like, what college am I going to? Kind of changes the conversation.
And something communicated with their families, since they're being not inundated, that's the wrong word, but introduced to that kind of language and that kind of cultural capital.
Board Member Cummins, Brittany.
So on this bullet, if I remember this may have morphed because there was a lot of other conversations, but I think there was a conversation around a concurrent enrollment class that wasn't about college and career awareness, but it was actually that there's a course that's available in colleges that's like that first year, I don't think it was called study skills, but it was kind of that same idea. It's whatever that first year course is, that they could make that a required concurrent enrollment course.
So there's options, even within this context, that kind of course could work. But the conversation would, do we require it or do we offer it? So whether we make it mandatory, there was part of the conversation was, let's make this course mandatory. Every kid in 9th grade has to take this course. And guess what? Every kid then gets a concurrent enrollment course. But it's also, do we want to mandate a course for students when they already have really limited schedules, as you guys have been through as a board? And so there's always those complexities of it.
Right. Yes.
So I was when I went to the Juab County school district, they have it in their high school.
Yep.
And I took it as a freshman going to college, and how to take notes, how to have study skills, how to manage time, how to all of that stuff, right? Just the basics. It's probably something that you probably should have as a sophomore or a junior in high school.
Use those skills earlier, right?
Right, but of course we're oblivious at that point anyways. But do I mandate? I don't like mandates. Do I offer? That would probably something I would probably encourage, especially because every student is not every student's going to go to college, right? So I know also at the high school in Juab, there's machinists who are, and carpentry and everything that have jobs ready for them the day they graduate high school. So, this may be obsolete for them. So I don't want to mandate, and I want to make it more individual. So maybe just to offer it as far as maybe a senior course or a junior course.
Well, what I'm thinking on any of these strategies, basically, if you say, let's go ahead and let you investigate that, and then we can bring you more information. It's basically how I see these.
What's sustainable.
We're not coming with the course would be this, it would include these things. We're more saying, do you want us to even think about this? I think is what this committee is for us today, is saying, you tell us what you want us to do more work on, and we will be happy to come back and say, here's what we're thinking, and you're like, yeah, no. We just didn't want the yeah, no, and have done all of that prior.
Right.
If you're like, we're not really interested in dealing with universal identification right now, don't dig into that. But if you are, then we would. And so as we kind of work through these strategies, if you feel like, please don't even attend to this one yet, we can always we'll still have the sheet, but this is not a priority item at this time, or we have no interest at this time, and we can be like, cross that one off the consideration list.
Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So I'm just curious, do we even have the authority to create standards for a concurrent enrollment course? I would think that would be a university course, and then we would couple. So
we would have to make the standards, and then the course would have to align with our standards.
So all of the standards for concurrent enrollment courses start as our standards.
They have to be at least 90%.
So they have
to our standards.
So my question is, do you feel like you have enough of a guidance to move forward with these two, the top two, and bring us back something? And then I would also, like, as you're working on things, especially the funding recommendations, if you can bring forward any recommendations to us so that we can start preparing for the legislative session and our asks, if you can bring those forward also. Do you feel like you have enough of a...
So let me get some clarity. So one of the things I heard so far potentially was board rule revision, bring you some ideas for what that could include based on these kind of recommendations, and then from there we can kind of hash out specifics. The new practices, looking at the potential of overlapping that with current resources we have now, and looking where we need to expand the awareness and that kind of thing with the parent component and such, and kind of just weaving some of these in. I think for funding, let's just look there real fast. If you're good with us looking into these things, we are happy to do so. We just didn't want to start conversations until you said, those sound like reasonable requests. Let's see what it would take. So for example, AP testing cost supplement for low income or first generation college students. Some of our LEAs do that now. Some of them don't, just due to limited funding.
Some of them were doing it and can no longer do
it. It's about $70 some dollars per kid to supplement the test. so that they can have access to actually earning the AP credit to reduce the college load over time. So it's just seeking, basically a line item of AP funding to support low-income and first-generation students in taking those tests would be that first one. The second one is a dashboard to really, our LEAs have no idea how well they're enrolling students unless they're the ones digging into it. So we'd like to look at the potential of developing a dashboard that says, here's the percentage of students in these different demographic groups that you're enrolling in your district and each school in comparison to the population that's present in that school. Because right now, this is an awareness campaign. Most of them are unaware that they're not meeting their kind of demographic enrollment with their AP and college concurrent enrollment credits. So if we had some kind of dashboard that they could actually just look at and go, oh, red flag, we are not enrolling. We have 3% and we have 23% of kids that in that particular group. There's just a lack of awareness due to lack of data.
Okay. Yes, Board Member Lisa.
Sorry, I'm so used to facilitating. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. She's that 12-year-old girl. So in my head, with the Data Gateway dashboard, I think there's one component here that I've been requesting for the last 6 to 8 months. Of putting maybe. I'd like to know, and I asked Yushi about the remediation rates and what we're doing with. And I was given some of those numbers, but what are we doing with the Common Core ELA and the math standards, and how is that related, and if that's affecting the AP and all these other courses, and because I think they mesh together, and so I almost would want a performance audit of those standards first, and I've asked for that to request at the audit committee. So until that happens, I almost think this is not enough information to really identify the strengths and weakness if we don't know the foundation strength and weakness first.
Gotcha.
So that's just a thought.
Okay. And then just going to make it quick through this, like seek funding to cover fees for concurrent enrollment. The admission fee and the tuition are cost prohibitive for some of our student populations. So again, some kind of just flat funding source. Provide LEAs compensation for first-time enrollee in an AP, CE, or IB course. So getting students who traditionally haven't been in a course like that in their high school careers and giving them some kind of financial incentive to enroll students who have not taken one of those types of courses. And then the last one is seek funding to run a summer concurrent enrollment pilot program to allow students to earn concurrent enrollment in the summer. And we thought this was prohibited by rule in terms of the school year, but it's not. As we read into it, it says it has to be, shall be, or whatever. It allowed the flexibility.
We found a couple ways to work around it so that
it is
if that opportunity does arise, there is a way that we can get them
if they would like to.
Yeah, if they want to.
Coursework done in the summer and still apply that to them.
And it would be on like the college campuses being offered, but so that they could actually, 1, get their feet on campus, 2, experience what college is like a little bit, and then 3, they're already offering courses in the summer at the university. So in terms of that load, it wouldn't be a lot. It would just be the kids actually getting to campus would be kind of the lift for students. So those are the funding recommendations that came out. I heard wait on the development of the data dashboard till we know a little bit more. Are the other 4, are those things you want us to look into? 1, what would the cost be? Who might be supportive of leading that legislation request?
Yes.
So just a reminder, when you're talking about the legislative fiscal request, we do, those should all come through Scott to the board through those business cases. We shouldn't be reaching out to legislators unless and until the board has kind of approved those legislative, budget requests. And so I think the best way to go would be to start preparing information for the business case that then we submit if it's approved to the governor, because it's kind of a process we've got. So you all would do the business cases, and you could do the business case for all of them, because probably based on the data you receive, you might find that one of them might be more effective than the others.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, committee, if you would like them to solicit feedback from the field about those business case models, and maybe what the field thinks also might be a better investment. But I guess I wouldn't go as far as reaching out to legislators yet, because we have a very a process where we submit those to the board, then the board goes to the governor, and then the governor, and that's about at the time once we submit those to the governor, that's when we would work, and you'd work in tandem with Scott and Deputy Superintendent Jones and Superintendent Dixon to do that kind of in a uniform way. We present all of our budget priorities together. Just a reminder.
So
Thank you.
would you like, maybe for guidance for us, would you like business cases on those 4 bullets? Not the dashboard this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Wonderful.
And then I guess the
So-
bottom components, just from a funding mechanism as well, require money to provide training to teachers. So we'll weave that last one into a budget request as well. Okay.
That would be great.
Okay. And then that proof of concept, just because we haven't, would that be something you would like us to potentially charge the U-Lead person with trying to do?
Yes.
So the U-Lead, we're still trying to figure out how that exactly is going to work, because there's a hiring committee, and then I guess we'll see how this works with the dynamic of them having a little bit of independence, but yet reporting to Superintendent Dixon. But it does seem like something we may want to talk about once either we've got a job description or we understand how involved that selection committee will be in the work versus. But that's not. I think it's a great idea.
It's something that a staff
think it is
person
something
could do,
good to
whether
look
it's the
into.
U-Lead or not. I
Yeah.
guess that would be the question. Would you like it to be attended to? If so, we'll figure out who.
Yeah, and
I guess
yes,
would be the
that's
better
probably
question.
good. Because the question is, we still don't quite know what that, how much
Right.
the board will be directing that work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess the question there is, would you like us to further facilitate moving forward on that item, a proof of concept, no matter who the staff person is that might lead that work?
Is everyone okay with it? I'm okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, and then, I think I feel good about our charge. So
Okay.
to repeat what I've heard today, we'll bring a board rule for revision. We'll start beginning some work around new best practices and try and weave continuous there. I think proof of concept, we'll start working on that and figuring out who might do that. Work on some business case analysis for the funding recommendations as well as the professional learning opportunities we'd like to offer. And then the probably couple that I'm left hanging on is, do you want us to bring you some information around what it would mean to do a universal screening practice for identification in the K-12 system for giftedness? The reason for that in terms of early college enrollment is that we know kids who are in the gifted program are very likely to be enrolled in early college courses. And so if you want to change who's in those programs or enhance who's in those programs, you have to somewhat change the identification process that occurs early in their careers to kind of get them on that pathway. So that's where that recommendation comes
So,
from. Let me stop there.
Just to clarify that recommendation, it would be for you to just look into it and show us what it would
what it
look
would
like.
take or what it
Okay.
would look like. Yeah, it'd be more of an information, and then you guys can decide if there's action upon that information.
Anybody okay with that? I'm okay with that. Okay. And then what was your other?
The last one would just be that the course. Do you want us to kind of put a proposal of what that course would include and what it would look like and what that would mean for students if we were to offer that course? I heard optional for sure, but just in terms of even looking at the offering opportunity.
Okay. Yes. Board member Lisa.
Are we talking gifted learners course, or are we talking
This would be the college
prep,
career standards.
college prep?
Yeah,
class.
the study skills.
Study
kind of
skill
what you need
course.
to know. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Resounding yes there. Okay. So we will work on what that might include, what it would look like, and also what it would take. Because if we have a college and career course, we need standards. And so whether we already have some standards that would work for that or not, I'm not as familiar with since I am ELA and not a high school background. Okay. Well, I think that leaves us with a good charge, and Kim as well, and Momi and Christelle, we're all kind of a unified team on this, so we can break up the work and get some things back to you in the next cycles and that kind of thing.
And board member Belknap had.
I have a little rub. I have a little rub with calling this a course, because in my mind that means
Required.
18 weeks or 9 weeks of work. So just food for thought. Think about it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your guidance.
Yes, thank you for sweating that out with us.
We have
Appreciate it.
3 more items. Okay. Yeah. .5 R277104. The ADA complaint procedure amendment and continuation. Yes, Ben.
Okay. So 277104 deals with ADA complaints made to the board by someone that uses the board building facility here that is a non-employee. Just basically specifies how we'll investigate that kind of thing. It's up for its 5-year review. Haven't really made any substantive changes to the rule, just kind of updated it stylistically, and it's ready for your consideration.
Any discussion to these changes? Okay. Oh, yes.
And I just barely saw this text, but apparently Tracy Watson, who was in the audience, was wanting to provide public comment, but she didn't have the opportunity.
Okay.
She just sent me a quick text, so I
Okay,
haven't
yes.
even read it all the way through.
Go ahead and read it.
So it just says, when you get to R277104, will you consider replace ADA with ADAAA? Throughout the rule, see the EEOC fact sheet on final regulations regarding ADAAA.
Oh, now we got to Google it.
Americans with disability. I mean, there must be, and we can look at this if you.
It's an amendment.
Yeah, ADAAA is reference to an amendment to the ADA, and I think it was in the
2008. Well, I'm so glad we didn't know that. I didn't know that.
So do we need to change that in this rule, Brian?
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be ADAAA, the ADA Amendment
Does
Act
it need
of
to be
2008.
changed?
Yeah,
That's the UE.
yeah, I guess
Okay.
Well, could we just
They're
change the
calling it as
definition?
the U.S. Equal
Or we could
Employment
just-
Opportunity.
it's fairly technical. I mean, I think the intent.
Could we
is-
just change the definition of ADA to include
Yeah.
that?
Well, yeah, that's another way. Others.
Okay.
If you'd like to just make direction to give us the opportunity to
Yes.
determine whether it should be ADA or ADAAA,
So
and
moved.
then we can get that ready for when it comes to the
Okay.
board in May. And then the second thing she said is on line 138. She was thinking that it would be better that these records be controlled as opposed to private.
138, that struck out.
Or
Am I looking-
135? 135.
Oh, okay,
sorry.
thank you.
So right now it says the superintendent shall classify any portions of a record which pertain to an individual's medical condition as private, and I guess her recommended, but it does say or controlled. So I don't know why.
I was on 135.
I wonder if she didn't
Yeah,
see.
I would
Yeah, it
just
says
that.
in accordance with subject or controlled. in
So
accordance
right now
with-
it gives
So-
the option. So maybe
Yeah.
she didn't keep reading and see
Right.
that it's either. Yeah,
So, okay.
I'll ask her if she.
So any other discussion on this rule? Board member Brittany Cummins, did you have it as?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm seeking a motion. Do you want to make Board member Cummins, your light's not on.
I move that we approve R277104, draft 1 on first reading and send it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-104 draft 1 on first reading and send it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Specify as amended and
As amended
and continued.
and continued. Thank you. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. So the next item is 2.6, R277-107, education services outside of educators' regular employment. This one's up for amendment and continuation.
Yeah, this
Ben.
is another one that's up for its 5-year review. This deals with private activities of educators. An example would be if they're providing a tutoring service to students. Talks about the rules they have to abide by as far as advertising and attracting customers for their business. So we haven't done any substantive changes here either, just stylistic changes on this, and it needs to be continued if the board is so inclined.
Okay.
Yes.
It says draft 1. Yeah.
Oh, should be draft 1.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Just a profound what moment on line 48 if and 49 educators who are involved in extracurricular activities that or provide their own businesses such as tutoring on the side, right, they're subject to school fees and laws.
Well, that's talking about extracurricular activities that an LEA sponsors.
Oh, then so like if a teacher is a coach or
Right.
a club
Yeah.
thing. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Board Member Brittany Cummins.
The rule keeps applying or using the word private but public education related activity. Does that need to be defined?
It is
or
defined.
is it
It's
in
defined on
here?
line 31.
31.
Oh.
Starting on line 31.
Okay. Means any type of activity for which. Okay, so it does have to include compensation. So it's a private but public. So if you have a teacher who says, I want to start a club, but it's basically their free time and their free there's nothing charged, they're just calling it a club and they're volunteering their time and everything. So this wouldn't apply to
This
that.
basically deals with an educator
Compensated.
for profit on the side activities.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'm seeking a motion. Okay, Board Member Warner.
I make a motion that we approve this on first reading.
As amended and continued.
As amended.
Continue.
And continued.
Oh, and continued for the next 5 years.
Okay.
Send to the board on second and final.
So the motion
And
before
send it
us.
to the board on second and final reading. Anything else I want to add to my motion?
So the motion before us is to approve R 277-107 draft 1 as amended.
And continued.
No, it was not amended. For continuation, draft 1 for continuation on first reading, and ask that the board approve it on second and final reading for continuation. Okay. Seeing no discussion to yes, Board Member Belknap.
I'm just wondering, and you'll just have to help me. I've read this whole thing. Are we adding anything that we would need the Utah High School Athletics Associations to change any of their policies to match this?
Not that I'm aware
Okay.
of.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Motion passed unanimously. Last item, 2.7. R 277-614.
I thought we were on 2.7.
Now-
That question didn't make any sense.
Now we're there.
I thought we were on the last one. Sorry.
So now we're on athletes and students with head injuries. And this is up for amendment and continuation.
Yeah, so
Ben.
So this particular rule was I think originally drafted to tie to a state law that was passed about 7 years ago that deals with head injuries, and that's why this specifically deals with head injuries. But this one's up for its 5-year review again. We've gone through mostly non-substantive changes, but the one thing that we have recommended substantively changing that I would highlight is in the definition of, where did we have it? It was, on line 26, excuse me, the definition of physical education class. So in draft 2, you'll see that we're recommending that you strike the word secondary and also the word period. That's to make this more consistent with the statute that this rule is implementing, and also basically that makes it consistent with most of the policies that we've been able to see that have implemented this rule in the past. If you have any questions about the protocol here, I think Jody can answer those. This is Jody Kaufman, the PE specialist who will be over this going forward.
Okay, so any questions from the board?
My same question.
So her question earlier was, is this going to cause
Why
a
don't
problem
you
for
repeat the
UHSAA?
question?
Is that going to, not a problem, are they going to need to, are we going to need to make them aware and make sure that is there anything changing here than what they already have?
That they would have to update.
No, so UHSAA already has a head injury policy, and all their coaches are trained.
So it matches us.
Yeah, so this matches what this is. This is more extensive because this isn't just high school athletics.
Right. Right. Yeah, I just
Right.
want to make sure
Yeah,
that
so
I wanna
this-
tell them to do it.
Yeah, so this isn't, this is, UHSAA is already doing this.
Yeah, I knew that.
Okay.
But this is our middle schools and elementary.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so I'm seeking a motion. Board Member Warner?
Okay, I propose that we amend this and continue it for 5 years. R277614. And approved draft 2.
Okay, so the motion before us is to,
On first reading. And recommend it to the full board for approval.
second and final reading. I knew what you were saying. So the motion before us is to approve R277-614 draft 2 for continuation on first reading and to take it to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. And we are done.